Welcome to Secrets in Slumber. Tonight we explore the mysteries of alien communication, not in words but through symbols, music, and silence. Settle in, let your thoughts drift, and allow the story to guide you gently into rest. Settle in now, find your place of rest, and let the day slip quietly into the background. The world outside may still hum with noise, with motion, with the flicker of light. But here, in this space, we move more slowly. We breathe more deeply. We listen more closely. Above us stretches a sky that has always been there, vast and endless. The stars, unblinking, have watched countless generations pass beneath them, and across time, across cultures and continents, we humans have looked upward and wondered, what is out there? And perhaps more importantly, how might it speak to us? For centuries, we imagined words, a message written in the firmament, a clear voice from the heavens, a signal that could be decoded. But what if the truth was quieter? What if communication does not always arrive in sentences and phrases, but in patterns, in echoes, in whispers of design? There are stories of people hearing tones when no instrument played, stories of symbols inscribed on wreckage that no one could decipher, stories of paintings etched in stone tens of thousands of years ago, spirals and grids that seem to belong both to the human hand and to something more. And there are stories of silence itself, the kind of silence that carries weight, as though the absence of words is its own message. Imagine now the desert at night. The sand cools under the moonlight. The air is still, touched only by the faint sigh of a breeze. Above, the stars hang like notes of a forgotten melody, scattered across the score of the sky. If there were ever a stage for contact, it would be here, not in noise, but in quietness. Not in chatter, but in symbols, tones, and images that slip past the mind and rest directly in the heart. Art has always done this. Music has always done this. A painting on a cave wall can stir us across millennia. A single note, sung or struck, can bring tears or calm. These are not translations of language, but transmissions of feeling, of structure, of connection. Could it be that those we imagine beyond the stars have chosen the same path, to speak not in words, but in art, in music, in symbols? We will walk together tonight through these possibilities. Through ancient carvings that resemble maps of the heavens, through harmonies said to echo in the presence of strange lights, through witness accounts where the sky itself became a canvas of patterns, through symbols found on fragments of wreckage, markings that seemed deliberate yet unreadable, and through the ways human beings, artists, musicians, poets, have sometimes felt touched by something greater, as if a hand unseen guided their brush, their bow, their pen. This is not a journey of proof. It is not a journey of answers. It is a journey of listening. Listening not for words, but for the quiet resonance that lingers beneath them. Listening for shapes and sounds that speak directly to the soul. Listening for the possibility that communication, at its most profound, does not need a dictionary. It only needs attention. So, let the day fall away. Let your body sink into stillness. Let your mind rest gently on the horizon between waking and dreaming. For tonight we listen not for voices, but for symbols. Chapter 1. Messages in Stone and Sky. The first marks we ever made as a species were not words, they were images. In caves across the world, from the limestone chambers of Lascaux in France to the red ochre walls of Bhimbetka in India, ancient hands pressed pigment against stone. Figures of animals, spirals and circles, human shapes with arms outstretched toward the heavens. The flicker of firelight must have danced across those surfaces thousands of years ago, casting shadows that seemed to bring the images alive. Imagine the quiet of those caves, the cool air, the smell of smoke, the slow dripping of water from stone, and on the walls the first attempt at communication that would outlast the people themselves. Archaeologists call them records of the hunt. or rituals of fertility. But some patterns resist such easy explanations. There are dots arranged like constellations, spirals that resemble galaxies, grids that echo the shapes of star maps. In the silence of the caves, one feels a question: were these symbols only for each other, or were they also for something or someone watching from above? The human urge to draw spirals is universal. From the Neolithic stones of Newgrange in Ireland to the petroglyphs carved in the deserts of Arizona, the motif repeats, a curling line circling inward or reaching outward. To some, these are symbols of the sun, of seasons, of the turning of life. To others, they resemble the very shapes astronomers later discovered in the cosmos, galaxies winding in silence across the dark. Sleep now, as you imagine standing at the entrance of one of those sites. The night is cool. The air carries the smell of earth and stone. Before you stretch ancient carvings that seem at once human and beyond human. Fingers once traced these lines, yet the message feels larger than the hands that carved them. Far to the south, across the desert of Peru, lies another mystery etched not on cave walls but into the very earth itself. The Nazca lines, shapes so large they can only be seen in their entirety from the sky. A hummingbird, a monkey, a spider, spirals and straight paths stretching across the arid plain. For centuries they lay hidden, barely visible from the ground, their full scale revealed only when aircraft flew above. Why would a culture create art that could not be appreciated by human eyes standing upon the earth? Was it ritual, a map for the gods? Or perhaps, as some quietly wonder, a message meant to be viewed from above, a communication to those in the sky? The desert wind still sweeps gently across those lines, keeping them preserved. Pilots describe looking down and feeling as if they were staring not at art but at signals. Lines of communication, silent yet deliberate. Patterns waiting for recognition. Across the ocean, in the American Southwest, the ancestral Pueblones carved petroglyphs into canyon walls. Some of these carvings show circles with radiating lines, often interpreted as suns, yet among them are stranger shapes, humanoid figures with large, round heads, dots surrounding them like stars. Local traditions speak of sky beings, visitors who moved between the worlds of earth and heaven. Whether these figures were gods, ancestors, or something else, they were remembered in symbols carved into stone. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the night sky as those ancient people must have seen it. No cities, no electricity, only the darkness of the desert and the sharp brilliance of stars. Every cluster, every wandering planet, every streaking light across the firmament was alive with meaning. To us, they are distant suns. To them, they were messages written in light. There is something soothing in this continuity. From the first marks on stone to the lines across the desert floor, humanity has always reached outward through symbols, not letters, not words. Shapes, patterns, designs, the language of geometry, of proportion, of resonance. Some researchers call this a cosmic alphabet, a set of symbols that might be understood not just by humans, but by any intelligence attuned to mathematics and form. A circle means wholeness, a spiral means movement, a line means direction. Perhaps these are ideas that need no translation. And so, when we wonder whether we have already been spoken to, perhaps we must look not to words, but to symbols carved in unlikely places. A spiral on a cave wall, a giant hummingbird etched into the desert, a circle of stones aligned with the solstice sunrise, silent messages waiting to be read. The caves remain, the stones remain, the lines in the desert remain, whether they were made only for human eyes, or also for eyes that watched from above. Their presence whispers of communication, a communication that bypasses speech and flows instead through the timeless shapes of art. Rest with that thought as the night deepens around us. The ancients were not so different from us. They too looked at the stars and wondered. They too reached for a way to speak beyond the limits of words. Their hands left symbols that still breathe across the centuries. And perhaps, just perhaps, those symbols were not only human at all. Across the world, the language of shape repeats itself. A circle, a triangle, a line stretching toward the horizon. No matter where you travel, these forms appear, not just in art, but in architecture, in sacred sites, in the very patterns of nature itself, the curve of a shell, the spiral of a galaxy, the rising and setting of the sun. It is as if the universe itself speaks through geometry, and perhaps in that geometry lies a language older than any spoken tongue. Take, for example, the great stone monuments of antiquity. At Stonehenge, in the rolling plains of southern England, massive slabs stand in circles aligned with the solstices. On the longest day of summer, the sun rises precisely above the heel stone. On the shortest day of winter, its last rays slip through the great arch to fall across the altar. This alignment was deliberate, a conversation between stone and sky. In Egypt, the pyramids of Giza rise with uncanny precision. The Great Pyramid is aligned almost perfectly to the cardinal directions. Some scholars have noted that the three pyramids mirror the arrangement of the stars in Orion's belt. Whether coincidence or intention, the effect is undeniable, a monument on Earth reflecting a pattern in the heavens, a symbol that connects ground to sky. Imagine lying down beneath those stars thousands of years ago. The air is dry, the desert night is cool, the pyramids loom as dark silhouettes against the starlight, and above them Orion glitters, three stars forming a line that seems to echo the very stones below. It is easy to feel that some message is being spoken, a correspondence between Earth and heaven. Far away in the Americas, other alignments appear. At Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, ancient builders left behind great stone structures aligned to solstices and lunar cycles. On one cliff face, a spiral petroglyph is illuminated by a shaft of sunlight only during the solstices, as if the stone itself becomes a clock, marking the turning of the year. Here again, a spiral, carved, deliberate, symbolic. Was it only a calendar? Or was it also a sign, a message, a shape chosen because it resonates with something beyond words? Mathematicians speak of the golden ratio, a proportion that appears in art, in architecture, and in nature. Seashells grow according to it, galaxies spiral with it. Artists from Leonardo da Vinci to the builders of temples have used it to shape their works. The ratio is universal, perhaps even cosmic, a symbol not invented but discovered. Could it be that other intelligences, if they exist beyond our world, would recognize the same patterns? A circle meaning unity, a triangle meaning stability, a spiral meaning motion or growth. These ideas need no translation. They are written into the fabric of the universe itself. Sleep now with the thought of these patterns. Stone circles aligned to the sun, pyramids echoing constellations, spirals cut into desert rock, touched only by light on the longest and shortest days, messages not spoken but inscribed in geometry. Throughout history, humans have described moments when these shapes seem to appear in the skies themselves, not as monuments of stone, but as formations of light. Witnesses speak of orbs hovering in triangular arrangements, of lights forming circles that rotated silently, of structured grids appearing against the night. Could these be a continuation of the same language, the sky writing to us in the same alphabet carved on stone? The thought is calming, almost comforting, that across time and distance, across the gulf between human and perhaps something other, there is a common script, not a language of words, but a language of forms. Consider the mandala, drawn by Buddhist monks in sand, circles within circles, intricate patterns that represent the cosmos. Once completed, they are brushed away, symbolizing impermanence, yet while they exist, they seem to radiate order, harmony, connection. To look at them is to feel part of something greater. Now consider the crop circles that have appeared in modern times. Many are proven hoaxes, made by human hands, yet others remain unexplained. Geometric patterns pressed into fields overnight, vast in scale, complex in form, circles, spirals, fractals, mathematical shapes that echo the same universal language. Whether made by people or by something else, they speak in the same way, through geometry, through pattern, through design that bypasses speech and goes straight to recognition. The universe itself seems to whisper in symbols, honeycombs shaped in perfect tessellations, the rings of Saturn, encircling a planet in endless arcs, the double helix of DNA, carrying the code of life in spirals of paired steps. Everywhere we look, the same shapes emerge, and so, if contact were ever to come, perhaps it would not be in sentences spoken, but in patterns revealed, a triangle of lights hovering silently, a circle of stone aligned to the sun, a spiral etched in desert soil. Close your eyes and let those forms drift across your imagination. The slow turn of a circle, the gentle curl of a spiral, the line of 3 points stretching across a dark sky. Feel how they calm the mind.
how they bring order to thought. This is why they endure. They soothe us, because they speak to something deep, something shared, something universal. In these shapes we may already have been spoken to, and in making them ourselves, in stone, in sand, in earth, perhaps we have already spoken back. The conversation continues, silent, geometric, endless.
Lift your gaze now from the stones and carvings to the sky above. It has always been our first canvas. Every culture, from the Inuit of the far north to the desert peoples of Africa, has looked into the stars and traced patterns. A hunter, a bear, a serpent, a swan, shapes that connect scattered points of light into stories. We call them constellations, but they are, at their heart, symbols written in the heavens. Consider Orion. His belt, 3 stars in a row, has been recognized across continents. The Egyptians aligned their pyramids with it. The Greeks made him a hunter. The Maya saw him as a turtle. Different names, different myths, yet the same pattern, the same recognition of 3 bright lights in a line. The symbol is universal. In the southern hemisphere, the cross of the south points toward the pole. To navigators, it was a guide. To storytellers, it was a sign of the sacred. The stars became not just points of light, but messages, telling where to travel, when to plant, how to dream. Sleep with this thought. The stars themselves are symbols waiting to be read. Silent messages spanning thousands of light years, yet recognized instantly by the human mind. Now imagine another intelligence, somewhere else, gazing at the same sky. The distances may shift, the constellations may change, but the impulse would be the same: to connect, to trace, to find meaning in points of light. Perhaps this is the first shared language of the cosmos, the act of turning stars into symbols. Some ancient sites seem to suggest that humans once sought to inscribe those starry symbols onto the earth. At Teotihuacan, in Mexico, the great Avenue of the Dead aligns with the setting of the Pleiades, a cluster of stars worshipped by many ancient peoples. The temples there, arranged in geometric precision, mirror celestial order. The city becomes a map, a reflection of the heavens. At Nebita Playa, in the Egyptian desert, a circle of stones erected thousands of years before Stonehenge aligns with Orion's belt and the solstice sunrise. This alignment suggests a message not just of timekeeping, but of correspondence. A statement carved in stone that says, "We see the stars, we understand their order, we write them upon the earth." In China, records dating back millennia describe the careful mapping of constellations. Star maps painted on silk, carved into bone, traced the heavens with meticulous care. To them, each constellation was not just a myth, but a mirror of human life, a symbol guiding the empire itself. The stars became a reflection of order, of governance, of destiny. Close your eyes and imagine lying on a grass field in the deep countryside, far from the lights of the city. The sky above is endless, scattered with thousands upon thousands of points. You begin to connect them, as the ancients did. A triangle here, a curve there. The mind cannot help but make symbols from the stars. It is as natural as breathing. Modern astronomy, for all its precision, still carries traces of this symbolic impulse. The names remain: Orion, Cygnus, Lyra. Behind the calculations and catalog numbers, the human need for story persists. The constellations are not only scientific coordinates, they are symbols bridging us to the sky. But there are stories, whispered and quiet, of symbols in the heavens that may not be entirely human. Witnesses to certain unexplained aerial phenomena have described lights forming geometric patterns. 3 in a triangle, 4 in a square, circles that appeared and rotated, silent, above the horizon. To those who saw them, the formations felt deliberate, as though the lights themselves were drawing a message across the sky. In 1997, thousands of people in Arizona and Nevada looked upward to see vast arrangements of lights gliding silently overhead. known now as the Phoenix Lights. The formation stretched across the desert, massive, ordered, impossible to dismiss as mere accident. Were they craft? Or were they symbols, lights drawn against the darkness, like a message meant to be seen, but not deciphered? Throughout the decades, pilots have spoken of objects that held steady formation, moving not randomly, but with a precision that suggested communication. A triangle of lights that followed their craft, a circle of orbs rotating slowly. Even on radar screens, operators sometimes described returns that arranged themselves in grids, as though the instruments were reading not objects, but patterns. What does one make of such things? Perhaps they are nothing more than coincidence. Or perhaps they are messages, written not in ink or stone, but in light. Messages that echo the same universal forms we see in the stars themselves. The thought is gentle, almost calming, that the universe might speak in symbols large enough to fill the sky. That when we look upward, what we see are not only stars but messages, constellations drawn by nature, and perhaps others drawn by intent. Rest in that possibility for a moment. The night sky becomes a book, its pages written in points of light. We are readers, tracing the lines, finding the shapes, weaving meaning, and maybe, just maybe, we are not the only ones doing the reading. The stars are not empty, the sky is not silent. It is filled with symbols waiting to be recognized, and so from the caves to the pyramids, from spirals carved into stone to lights gliding across a desert night, one thread remains. The impulse to communicate, not through words but through patterns, the same language, ancient and enduring. This is the beginning of our journey, a reminder that long before we spoke across the void with machines and signals, we spoke through symbols, and perhaps we still do. The story of symbols is also the story of endurance. Words change. Languages vanish, but a circle drawn in the sand remains a circle. A spiral etched on stone remains a spiral. The meaning may shift, but the form persists. Imagine walking through a ruined city, its language forgotten, its rulers gone. The inscriptions on the walls might be unreadable, the sounds of its speech lost to time. Yet if you saw a sun carved above a doorway, you would know what it was. If you saw a figure with arms outstretched, you would sense welcome or reverence. Symbols speak across the silence of centuries. This is why they matter. They are the simplest, yet the strongest. They endure where words cannot. And so, if an intelligence wished to leave a message that could outlast time, symbols would be the natural choice. Consider the great spirals carved into the rocks of New Mexico, or the concentric circles found in Australia, etched by Aboriginal peoples into the desert stone. Their exact meanings may be debated, but their presence is undeniable. Across continents, across cultures, across thousands of years, the same shapes appear. Circles, spirals, lines reaching toward the horizon. Some anthropologists suggest these are born from the human mind itself, archetypes that emerge naturally from our shared consciousness. Carl Jung called them symbols of the collective unconscious, forms that rise up from deep within us, regardless of culture or time. Others wonder if the universality points to something beyond the human mind, something woven into the structure of reality itself. In either case, the result is the same. A symbol carries meaning even when its maker is forgotten. And perhaps this is why they may also serve as the first bridge between us and anything beyond us. Sleep with this thought. If contact ever comes, it will not begin with sentences. It will begin with something simpler. A pattern of lights in the sky, a shape etched into a field, a symbol that says, I am here. Even our own efforts to speak outward have leaned toward symbols. In 1972, when humanity sent out the Pioneer spacecraft, the message engraved upon its plaque was not written in English or Chinese or Arabic. It was drawn in symbols, a man and woman, the outline of our solar system, the position of the sun relative to pulsars. Not words but images, not sentences but patterns that could be read by any intelligence capable of seeing. When the Voyager probes followed a few years later, they carried golden records with music, with sounds of Earth, with greetings in many tongues. But even here, the record's cover was inscribed with a map, lines and circles. A pattern pointing back to us, a symbol of origin, a silent message to say this is where we are. Symbols cross the gap where words cannot. They move through silence. They move through time. Think again of the Nazca lines spread across the desert floor. For centuries, they were invisible to those standing on the ground. Yet from above, they form perfect shapes. Was this deliberate, a way of saying, we know you are watching from the sky? Perhaps, perhaps not. But the possibility itself is enough to stir wonder, and in that wonder lies the heart of communication. It does not always matter whether the message was intended or accidental. What matters is that it is received, that it resonates, that it awakens curiosity. A spiral in stone awakens the same awe now as it did thousands of years ago. That is communication across time. The same may be true across space. A light in the sky, arranged in a deliberate pattern, awakens curiosity. We cannot know its intent, but we know it was seen. That is the beginning of dialogue. Rest now with this idea. Communication may not need words. It may not need translation. It may only need recognition, a symbol that stirs a response, a pattern that calls forth wonder. That is enough. In this way, the oldest symbols, circles, spirals, alignments, may be more than relics. They may be rehearsals, humanity practicing, across millennia, the act of speaking without words, preparing, perhaps unknowingly, for the day when such speech may cross not centuries, but stars. So the caves whisper, the stones whisper, the stars themselves whisper. They whisper not in voices, but in shapes. And if we learn to listen, truly listen, we may find that the first messages of contact have already been written. Let the thought ease you deeper into rest. The language of symbols is older than us, older than words, older perhaps than Earth itself. It is the silent symphony playing all around us. In stone, in sky, in the very patterns of life. And so chapter 1 closes. We leave behind the caves, the deserts, the monuments, and the stars, but we carry their lesson with us, that communication does not require speech. It requires only the recognition of form, the quiet knowing that a circle is a circle, a spiral is a spiral, and a line of lights in the sky is never just an accident. The first bridge is already there. Symbols endure. Symbols connect, symbols speak. Chapter 2. The Language of Harmony. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the night, not as silent, but as filled with tones too deep, too subtle for ordinary hearing. A low hum steady as the earth's own heartbeat. A resonance that seems to rise from the ground itself, vibrating through stone, through water, through bone. For as long as we have listened, we have suspected that sound is more than vibration. It is connection, it is pattern, it is harmony. The ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras once spoke of the music of the spheres. He taught that the planets themselves moved in such proportion that their orbits created a kind of cosmic harmony, not audible to the ear, but perceivable to the soul. The ratios of their revolutions, he said, were like notes in a grand symphony, the universe itself playing a song. It is a soothing thought that beyond the chatter of daily life, beyond the noise of conflict and confusion, there is a harmony that holds the stars in balance. That the cosmos is not chaos, but music. Across cultures, echoes of this idea appear. In India, the syllable Om is regarded as the primordial sound, the vibration of creation itself. In Norse myth, the world was sung into being. Among the Navajo, Chants restore harmony between people and the universe. Everywhere, sound becomes more than sound. It becomes a bridge between the human and the divine. Now think of those who have claimed encounters with the unknown. Many describe not only what they saw, but what they heard. A hum, a tone, a vibration that seemed to fill the air. Pilots have spoken of hearing a low-frequency thrumming as strange craft moved silently nearby. Witnesses on the ground have described a chorus of tones, pure and steady, without source. Some even say the sound seemed to pass through them, as if their own bodies had become instruments resonating to an unseen hand. It is curious that so many describe these sounds not as random noise but as ordered, harmonious, as though the sound itself were a message, a communication that bypasses words. Music, after all, is a universal language. Across cultures, across centuries, a simple melody can evoke joy or sadness. A rhythm can stir the body to movement. A lullaby can soothe a child to sleep, whether sung in English, Swahili, or Chinese. The words may change, the effect does not. Perhaps this is why sound may be chosen as a bridge between us and whatever lies beyond. It requires no translation. The vibration itself is enough. Close your eyes and listen inward. Imagine a single tone, clear and steady, filling the darkness. Let it swell gently, then fade, leaving silence. In that moment you feel connected to yourself, to the space around you, to something larger. That is the power of sound. It is also the reason we have used it for ritual. Drums echoing in caves, bells ringing from temples, choirs rising in cathedrals. Each culture discovers that sound can shape space, alter mood, open the mind, and each culture intuits that perhaps sound carries further than we imagine. Perhaps it carries outward, into the silence of the cosmos. Modern science has begun to circle back to these ideas. Researchers study how certain frequencies influence the brain, inducing calm or focus. Others investigate the possibility that the universe itself hums with background radiation, a faint echo of the Big Bang, like the residue of the first chord ever struck. Even whales, singing their songs across the oceans, remind us that communication need not be in words. It can be in tones, in harmonies, in rhythms that stretch across vast distances. So when we hear of UFO encounters marked not by voices but by sounds, humming, pulsing, resonant tones, perhaps we should pause. Perhaps these are not mechanical noises at all, but communication. A message delivered not in speech, but in resonance, a way of saying we are here. Imagine standing in an open field at night. The stars above are sharp and endless. The air is still. Suddenly, you feel it, a vibration, subtle at first, then growing. It is not a noise you hear with your ears, but with your whole body. Your chest hums. The ground beneath your feet seems alive. In the distance, lights hover, silent yet accompanied by this presence of sound. What would you feel? Fear, awe, or perhaps a strange recognition, as though the tone itself were familiar, like a memory buried deep within. This is the promise of sound, that it can connect without explanation, that it can soothe without translation, that it can bridge silence with harmony. As you drift deeper into rest, let this thought cradle you. Perhaps the universe is already speaking to us in song, not in words carried on radio waves, but in vibrations, in tones, in harmonies that resonate in the spaces between stars. Perhaps the music of the spheres is not only philosophy but reality, a cosmic language we are only beginning to remember how to hear. Across decades of testimony, one detail lingers with remarkable consistency. When people describe encounters with the unknown, they often speak not only of what they saw, but of what they heard. The accounts vary in detail, but a pattern emerges. A hum, a vibration, a chorus of tones that seem at once mechanical and yet strangely alive. In 1966, in Westall, Australia, hundreds of schoolchildren and teachers reported seeing a strange disc descend onto a field. The sighting has been retold many times, But what is less often remembered is that some described hearing a humming sound in the air, a low and steady vibration that seemed to saturate the space around them. The craft itself was silent in terms of engines, yet the hum remained, as though the presence of the object carried with it a resonance. Pilots, too, have spoken of this. One U.S. Navy aviator, reflecting on his own encounter with an unidentified craft, described the sensation of a pressure in his ears, a tonal presence that could not be attributed to the instruments in his jet. It was like standing near a great organ, he said, with a note held just beneath the threshold of hearing. You didn't hear it so much as feel it. On the ground, witnesses have compared the tones to everything from bees buzzing to choirs singing. In some cases, the sound was not frightening, but oddly calming. It was beautiful, one farmer said, recalling lights that passed silently over his land. It was like a hymn, but without words, just a sound that seemed to reach inside you and say, "Be still." This detail, the use of tone rather than voice, echoes through cultures long before the modern UFO era. Ancient traditions often describe encounters with the divine in terms of music. The Vedas of India speak of creation beginning with sound, the syllable Om reverberating through the void. Medieval mystics wrote of angelic choirs, voices that carried harmony rather than words. Even in remote shamanic traditions, the drumbeat was not only rhythm, but a way of entering into dialogue with other realms. Could it be that those who appear in our skies, whatever they may be, use sound for the same reason? Because it reaches deeper than language, because it cannot be misinterpreted, because it bypasses words and goes straight to recognition. Modern researchers have tried to capture these sounds. Microphones placed near alleged landing sites have sometimes recorded low-frequency hums, tones just below the level of ordinary hearing. Audio spectrographs show bands of resonance that do not correspond to engines or known equipment. Skeptics argue these are power lines, or distant machinery, or tricks of wind. But witnesses insist the tones were unlike anything they had ever felt. And felt is the key. Again and again, the language is not about hearing, but about sensation. The hum presses against the body, vibrates in the bones, stirs the chest. It is not music in the conventional sense, but harmony in the literal sense, resonance. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine that resonance washing through you, not as a song to be remembered, but as a tone to be experienced. It does not tell you what to think, it simply places you in harmony, like an instrument being tuned. This, perhaps, is communication of a different order. There are even accounts of contactees, people who claim to have been taken aboard craft, who describe hearing tones that seem to serve as instructions. One man said the beings he encountered never spoke, but the room itself filled with a chord, 3 tones layered together, and in those tones he understood: sit, be calm, wait. Such accounts are difficult to verify, yet they repeat across time and place. Tone as command, harmony as instruction, communication not through speech, but through resonance. In science, resonance is the principle that one vibrating object can cause another to vibrate at the same frequency. Strike a tuning fork, and another nearby tuning fork of the same pitch will begin to hum in sympathy. Some suggest that communication through tone may work in a similar way. The message is not in the content, but in the alignment it creates. One being resonates, and another follows. Now think of the ancient idea of the music of the spheres. Pythagoras taught that the planets were in harmony because their motions were governed by ratio. Modern astronomy has confirmed that orbital resonances exist. Jupiter's moons, for example, are locked in precise patterns, their movements reinforcing one another in cosmic rhythm. The ancients imagined this as music. Perhaps they were not so far from the truth. To those who claim to have heard tones in the presence of UFOs, the experience often carries a similar impression, that something larger is in harmony, and they are simply caught within its resonance. They may not understand the source, but they recognize the effect. There is something soothing in this thought, that the universe, at its heart, is not a clash of noise, but a symphony of order. That what we call anomalies may be invitations, brief glimpses into a greater harmony. And so, the hum reported by a farmer, the vibration felt by a pilot, the hymn-like chord described by a contactee, all may belong to the same silent symphony, a communication not through words but through sound, not through language but through resonance. Let this ease you further into rest. Imagine the earth itself humming, the stars above vibrating with hidden tones, the spaces between filled with harmony. You do not need to understand the words, you only need to feel the resonance, because perhaps the message has never been in speech at all. Perhaps the message has always been in the hum. In the quiet of the ocean's depths, another kind of music plays. Whales, vast and ancient, sing songs that carry across hundreds of miles. Long, low notes that shift in rhythm and pitch, repeating, evolving, weaving patterns in the dark water. Scientists have studied these songs for decades. They are not random. Each population sings a shared melody, sometimes changing it slowly, sometimes adopting an entirely new phrase. The songs are not words, yet they are communication, complex, ordered, deliberate. When we listen to the whales, we recognize something profound. Music, in its essence, is not confined to humans. It is a bridge of pattern, resonance, and rhythm that carries meaning without speech. Birds, too, fill the air with song. Some repeat the same call across generations, unchanged for centuries. Others improvise, weaving elaborate melodies that shift with the seasons. The forest, at dawn, becomes a symphony of signals, mating calls, warnings, greetings, all sung in patterns that need no words. Now imagine that intelligence elsewhere might do the same. Not words, not sentences, but tones, not grammar, but music. If whales can speak across oceans, why could not others speak across the silence between stars? There are stories, quiet, unverified, but persistent, of encounters where witnesses reported not only humming or vibration, but music. One family, camping in the desert, spoke of hearing what they described as a choir without voices when a light passed slowly overhead. Another witness, decades earlier, claimed that when a craft hovered above a field, the air was filled with tones that rose and fell like an organ, steady and resonant, leaving him both calm and unsettled. The details differ, but the pattern is clear. Sound, not as noise but as harmony. A communication that feels closer to music than to language. In 1977, when humanity sent the Voyager probes into interstellar space, we included not just diagrams and greetings, but music. Bach, Beethoven, Blind Willie Johnson, Peruvian panpipes, Senegalese percussion. The reasoning was simple: words divide, but music unites. A melody can be recognized by any ear, even one that does not understand our speech. Perhaps in the same way, others have already chosen music as their medium. Consider again the reports of tones in UFO encounters. Many describe the sound as layered, multiple frequencies woven together, rising and falling like notes in a chord. Some even compare it to instruments, a pipe, a string, a choir. Rarely is it described as mechanical grinding. More often, it is described as ordered, as if shaped with intention. What if these sounds are not side effects of propulsion, but part of the message itself? What if the hum, the chord, the resonance, is itself a form of speech? It would make sense. Music is universal. It is mathematical, built on ratios of vibration. A string plucked at half its length produces a note, an octave higher. A drum struck in rhythm produces patterns that can be recognized across cultures. Harmony is not subjective. It is rooted in physics. An intelligence that knows vibration would know harmony. Close your eyes now. Imagine yourself drifting in the dark, hearing not words but tones, a deep hum, a higher note, then another, weaving between them. You do not know the language, but you know the feeling. Calm, connection, presence, that is enough. There are even stories of people who felt compelled to respond. Some witnesses, hearing tones, found themselves humming back, as though their own voices were drawn into the harmony. One man claimed that when he did, The lights above him shifted in pattern, as though answering. Was it real communication? Or simply imagination stirred by sound? The truth remains hidden, but the impulse is telling. Music invites dialogue. Think of how children learn. Before words they learn rhythm, melody, tone. A parent's lullaby carries more meaning than the syllables it contains. Comfort, safety, presence. The music itself is the message. Perhaps this is how communication begins everywhere, with tone, with resonance, with the simplest bridge of vibration. In our own experiments, we search for signs of intelligence by listening. Radio telescopes sweep the sky for signals, scanning for patterns in the noise of the universe. What we seek is not words, but order, a repeating pulse, a harmonic structure, a sign that the signal is deliberate. We are in essence listening for music, and perhaps we have already heard it. In the hum of encounters, in the tones described by witnesses, in the harmonies that linger long after the lights have gone. There is something deeply soothing in this possibility that the cosmos is not silent, that across its vastness vibrations carry meaning, that we, like the whales in the ocean and the birds in the forest, may be part of a greater chorus. Let that thought carry you deeper into rest. The universe as symphony, humanity as one voice among many, communication not through words but through harmony. If the first chapter was about symbols carved in stone and sky, this chapter is about the songs carried in silence. Together, they remind us that perhaps we are already surrounded by messages, not waiting to be translated, only waiting to be heard. Through whispers of tone, through the hum of unseen engines, through the songs of whales and the hymns of stars, a pattern emerges. It is the suggestion that harmony itself may be the most ancient, most universal form of language. Harmony does not divide. It does not require translation. It simply exists, waiting to be felt. The philosopher Pythagoras centuries ago taught that harmony was not only a matter of sound, but of proportion, of balance, of order. He spoke of the music of the spheres, each planet moving in a rhythm that contributed to the whole. He believed that the universe itself was structured like an instrument, its strings invisible but resonant, its music silent yet enduring. That teaching may have been symbolic, or it may have been literal. In either case, it was an attempt to describe a truth too large for words, that the cosmos is not chaos, but composition. When witnesses describe tones in the presence of strange craft, when they speak of hums that press against their bodies, of chords that seem to instruct without commanding, they may be describing the same truth. That communication at its highest form is not about vocabulary, it is about resonance. Consider the stillness after a storm. The air is different, charged, resonant, alive, or the moment in a cathedral when a single voice rises and fills the vaults with song. Even without knowing the words, the listener understands. The meaning is not in the syllables, it is in the harmony. If we imagine that extraterrestrial intelligence has sought to reach us, it may be in this way, not with complex grammars or coded signals, but with harmony, with resonance that we can feel in our bones, with tones that remind us of what is already true, that we are part of a larger composition. There are stories, rare but telling, of people who felt more than heard. One woman described sitting in her garden when a light hovered overhead. She closed her eyes and felt as though a chord had been struck inside her, as though she herself was part of the instrument. It was not sound, she said. It was presence. Such testimonies are often dismissed, filed away as imagination. Yet perhaps they are glimpses of something older than language, a universal speech that does not require translation. A speech that whales know, that birds know, that planets themselves know, and we too know it, though we forget. We hear it in the lullaby that calms a child, in the chant that carries across a desert night, in the hum that lingers long after a bell has been struck. We know harmony because we are made of it. Even science, in its most precise measurements, finds harmony at the heart of matter. Electrons vibrate in shells, atoms resonate in bonds, molecules sing at frequencies we can measure but not hear. The body itself is an orchestra of rhythms, heartbeat, breath, brainwave. Each of us is in essence a harmony. So when we encounter tones in the presence of the unknown, perhaps it is not intrusion, but invitation. Perhaps it is recognition. The cosmos saying, you are part of this symphony too. Let that thought settle over you like a blanket. The idea that communication may not require words, that presence itself may be the message, that when tones rise in the air, or hums linger in the bones, or music drifts without source, it may be nothing more and nothing less than harmony, calling to harmony. The ancients carved symbols into stone, the moderns record photographs of discs in the sky. Between them, across the centuries, harmony has endured, carried by voices, by strings, by winds, by the very resonance of the earth. And tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you too are part of that quiet harmony, the hum of your breath, the rhythm of your heart, the stillness of the room around you. Together they form a chord, and in that chord is the same message that has been whispered for millennia. You are not alone. You are part of something vast, something ordered, something harmonious. It does not matter if you cannot translate the message. It does not matter if you do not know the words, because perhaps there are no words. Perhaps harmony is enough. The silence lingers. The sky is not empty. The message is already here. Chapter 3. Symbols in the sky. The sky has always been a canvas. By day it carries the sun, clouds, and storms. By night it holds the stars, the planets, and the shifting glow of the moon. But sometimes it holds more. Sometimes it carries symbols. For centuries, people have looked up and traced patterns across the heavens. Hunters, bears, serpents, crosses. The constellations are proof that we instinctively turn lights in the sky into meaning. But in modern times, reports have emerged of patterns that are not natural, patterns that seem deliberate, as though drawn across the firmament by unseen hands. Consider the pilots who speak of lights moving in formation, not scattered, not random, but arranged. 3 lights in a triangle, silent and steady. 4 in a square, gliding without sound. Circles rotating slowly against the night. On radar screens, operators sometimes describe returns that do not move like aircraft but like symbols. Points appearing, holding shape, then vanishing together, as if the sky itself were sketching a message and erasing it in the same breath. The Phoenix lights of 1997 remain one of the clearest examples. Thousands of people across Arizona and Nevada looked upward on a spring night and saw vast arrangements of lights gliding overhead. Some described a V-shape stretching across the desert sky, its silent movement unlike any conventional aircraft. Others saw orbs holding formation, steady and deliberate, as if tracing a symbol across the darkness. Witnesses recall the quiet most of all. No roar of engines, no sonic booms, just the vastness of shape, lights held in geometric precision, sliding silently overhead. One man said, it was like the sky itself had turned into a diagram. Another woman described the lights as a constellation that moved, like someone was writing across the stars. Events like this are unsettling, not because of their spectacle, but because of their order. Random lights can be dismissed as flares, balloons, aircraft, but formations, steady, geometric, feel intentional. They awaken the same instinct that once turned scattered stars into Orion and Cygnus. We cannot help but read symbols in the sky, and when those symbols move as one, they feel like communication. Close your eyes and imagine standing in a desert field beneath the Arizona night. The air is cool. The ground radiates the warmth of the day. Above you, lights emerge. At first they seem like stars, but then you realize they are aligned. They glide together, vast and silent. You feel small, not afraid, but part of something larger. It is not a word you see, it is not a phrase, it is a pattern, and the pattern feels like a message. Pilots have reported similar experiences. Some describe chasing lights that held formation like a squadron, only to break apart in impossible directions. Others speak of radar locks on multiple objects that vanished in unison, leaving no trace. For them, the sense is not only of technology, but of intention. It was like they wanted us to see the shape, one aviator said, like they were drawing something for us. In the quiet hours of night, radar rooms tell their own stories. Operators watching screens glowing green in the dark recount objects that appeared in perfect geometric arrays, not one blip, but many. Not scattered, but arranged. Sometimes the formations lasted minutes, sometimes only seconds, but always, the sense was of pattern, not accident. These accounts raise questions. If such things are real, are they signals, messages, not in words but in symbols, written across the sky for us to notice? Perhaps the answer lies, not in what the patterns say, but in what they evoke. To see a triangle of lights where none should be, is to feel wonder. To see a circle of orbs rotate in silence, is to feel awe. These emotions are themselves a form of communication, bypassing language and stirring something deeper. There are even ancient echoes. Petroglyphs in the American Southwest show circles with radiating lines, humanoid figures surrounded by dots. Were these depictions of stars, or were they memories of formations in the sky, drawn into stone so they would not be forgotten? The similarity between what was carved thousands of years ago and what is reported today is striking. Circles, spirals, clusters of dots, the same symbols appear again and again. It may be that the sky has always been used as a canvas, not just by us, tracing constellations, but by others, arranging lights, and if so, the message may not be linguistic. It may simply be recognition, a reminder that we are not alone under the stars. Rest in that possibility now. The next time you look upward, remember that the constellations were once messages to our ancestors. Orion, the Pleiades, the Cross of the South, all born from the human need to read meaning into the heavens. If we have always done so, why could not others do the same? Why could not the symbols we see be not only ours but theirs too? The silence lingers. The sky is not empty. It is full of symbols, waiting to be seen. In the long quiet of flight, pilots often find themselves alone with the sky. Hours pass with only the steady hum of engines, the glow of instruments, the faint chatter of radio traffic. And then, sometimes, something appears, something that does not belong. Across decades of aviation, one detail repeats: lights in formation. Not just a single object moving erratically, but multiple points of light, aligned with precision, gliding in ways that no squadron of conventional craft could manage. One U.S. Air Force officer, reflecting years later on an encounter in the 1950s, described watching three luminous objects hold a perfect triangle above his bomber. They moved as one, he said, not like planes in formation, correcting and adjusting, but like they were parts of a single shape. The triangle held steady for minutes before the lights blinked out, leaving the sky empty, his instruments unchanged, his memory unsettled. Civilian pilots have echoed the same story. A commercial airline captain in the 1970s recalled looking out from his cockpit at cruising altitude and seeing 5 lights arrayed in a straight line parallel to his aircraft. At first I thought they were other planes, he admitted. But they stayed fixed, matching our speed exactly, without navigation lights, without radio contact, without any trace on radar. They were there, and then they weren't. Radar operators, too, have told their part of the story. During exercises in the North Atlantic, naval crews reported blips appearing on screens in sudden geometric patterns, squares, triangles, arcs. It was like someone was drawing on the scope, one technician said. Objects would appear, hold steady, then vanish all at once, as if erasing a line. To those in the darkened rooms where green light flickered across phosphor screens, the impression was not of accident, but of demonstration. Such accounts are difficult to prove, yet they form a pattern too consistent to ignore. Again and again, the descriptions return to the same themes: multiple lights, geometric shapes, deliberate movements, sudden vanishing, not chaos, but structure. What could such formations mean? If they are real, why appear in shapes rather than singular craft? One answer is simple: because shapes are symbols, and symbols are understood across boundaries. A triangle of lights is recognizable instantly. A circle speaks without words. A line of 5 points is clear without translation. In this sense, the formations may be less about maneuver and more about message. A way of saying, see us, recognize us, know that we are here. This is not without precedent. Humans, too, have used the sky for messages. Ancient cultures lit great bonfires on hilltops to send signals across valleys. In modern times, pilots sometimes fly in formation as demonstrations, spelling letters or symbols across the air. Fireworks burst into shapes that carry meaning to those watching below. We have always turned the sky into a medium for communication. Why should others not do the same? There are stories of pilots who felt that very impression. One described a formation of 4 lights that followed his jet through a training mission. They held a square beside us for a full minute, he said, then shifted into a diamond and vanished upward. It was like they wanted us to see the change, like the pattern itself was the point. Another spoke of being read by the shapes, as though the lights were not only showing themselves but watching in return, gauging reaction. In the silence of those moments, communication may already have taken place, not in words, but in symbols. A triangle above the clouds, a circle drifting across the horizon, a line of lights holding steady. These are patterns anyone can see, anyone can recognize, no matter the culture, no matter the language. Close your eyes and imagine being in the cockpit of a small plane. The dials glow softly in the dark. The engine hums. The sky around you is endless, scattered with stars. Then from the corner of your vision, you see 3 lights, equidistant, holding a perfect triangle. They glide with you, silent, steady. For a few minutes, you are no longer alone. You feel it in your chest. This is not random. This is deliberate. This is a message. When radar operators speak of blips forming grids, when pilots recall lights shifting from one shape to another, they are describing not technology, but communication. The shapes are language, a universal one. The idea may sound simple, but simplicity is its strength. Symbols endure because they need no translation. A circle carved in stone 10,000 years ago still speaks today. A triangle of lights in the sky speaks just as clearly. In both cases, the message may be the same: presence, recognition, connection. Perhaps the real mystery is not whether the symbols are there, but whether we are willing to read them. For now, most reports rest quietly in archives. Some appear in official studies, noted and dismissed. Others remain only as stories, whispered by pilots to colleagues, written in letters, spoken in conference halls. But together, they form a tapestry, a record of the sky being used as a medium, a page on which symbols appear and vanish. Rest now in that thought. The sky is not only weather and stars, it is a canvas, and sometimes, across its vast darkness, messages are written not in ink or stone, but in light. The silence lingers, the symbols endure, and the sky remains a book, still being written. When lights appear for one person, the story remains fragile. It may be explained away, doubted, or forgotten. But when lights appear for thousands, when entire towns look upward together, the story takes on weight. The sky becomes not just a backdrop, but a stage, and what unfolds there feels less like a sighting and more like a message written for all to see. The Phoenix Lights of 1997 remain among the most famous of these events. For nearly 3 hours, across Arizona and parts of Nevada, people reported formations of lights gliding silently overhead. Some described them as a vast V-shape, others as orbs in steady alignment, but all agreed on their immensity and their order. Children pointed from backyards. Families gathered on rooftops. Pilots and police officers, accustomed to aircraft, admitted they could not explain what they saw. One officer, trained to dismiss exaggeration, described the lights as the size of several football fields, moving silently above the desert. To many, it felt less like an intrusion and more like a display, a sign meant to be witnessed, perhaps even remembered. The aftermath was telling. Officials suggested flares, dismissed the reports, and the event slipped into the realm of debate. Yet for those who stood beneath the sky that night, no dismissal erased the memory. The formation was too vast, the silence too heavy, the order too precise. The symbol lingered. Years earlier, in the Hudson Valley of New York, another series of mass sightings stirred the same impressions. Throughout the 1980s, thousands of residents reported immense triangular formations of lights moving slowly across the night. Some described craft so large they blocked out stars as they passed. Others saw orbs shifting from one formation to another. Entire highways pulled to the roadside, drivers standing beside their cars, watching together in silence as the sky drew symbols above them. Witnesses remember the feeling as much as the sight. Oh, quiet, the sense that the world had paused if only for a few minutes. It was like being in a cathedral, one man said, describing the hush that fell over the gathered crowd. The lights were not threatening, not aggressive. They were present, deliberate, and vast. The symbol was not only in the shapes above, but in the gathering itself, humans brought together by wonder. In 1980, across the Atlantic, the Rendlesham Forest incident unfolded over several nights near a U.S. Air Force base in England. Military personnel reported lights moving in strange patterns through the trees and fields. Some saw orbs hovering in geometric arrays. Others described beams of light descending in sequences that felt ordered, almost scripted. At one point, a deputy base commander recorded measurements, noting how the lights appeared in a triangular arrangement, flashing in intervals like signals. What struck many was not only the strangeness of the lights, but their behavior, appearing in deliberate repetition, as though marking the sky with intent. Some witnesses later described symbols on the craft itself, geometric shapes etched into its surface, further deepening the impression that this was not accident, but communication. What links these mass sightings is not only scale but resonance. They stir emotion beyond curiosity. The people who watched them speak less of fear than of significance. The shapes felt like messages. The silence felt deliberate. The very act of being seen together felt like part of the experience. Imagine yourself among them, standing in a quiet neighborhood street, or in a forest clearing, or on a desert hillside. Around you, strangers gather, their faces tilted upward. Above, a formation of lights holds steady. A triangle, a circle, a vast arc. You do not know what it means, but you know it means something. The silence deepens, and in that silence, the symbol takes root. These events, whether in Phoenix or Hudson Valley or Rendlesham, may be remembered less as sightings and more as symbols, moments when the sky became a book and humanity glimpsed a page. The message may not be translatable, but it is undeniable. Researchers sometimes speak of communication by presence. The idea that to appear, to be seen, is itself a message. Words may never be spoken, but meaning is still delivered. A formation of lights across the desert sky may say nothing more or less than we are here. And for many, that is enough. In archives and reports, the details are catalogued, times, altitudes, compass headings, but in memory, what lingers is the shape. The vast V above Phoenix, the triangle over Hudson Valley, the beams in Rendlesham Forest, symbols not erased by official explanations, but etched in the collective consciousness of those who saw them. Close your eyes now, and let one of those images drift across your mind. A formation of lights sliding silently over rooftops, a triangle blotting out stars, a circle hovering above treetops. The meaning may never be written in words, but the feeling remains, and in that feeling lies the message. The sky is not only stars, it is a canvas, and sometimes the symbols drawn there are large enough for us all to see. Symbols do not always demand translation. Sometimes their meaning lies not in what they say, but in how they make us feel. A circle in the sand, a triangle of stones, a line of fire across the ridge of a hill. These are not words, yet we understand them. They are presence made visible, intention made plain. The same may be true of symbols written in the sky. For those who saw the Phoenix Lights, the Hudson Valley formations, or the beams in Rendlesham Forest, the message was not a sentence to be decoded. It was an experience to be remembered, a sense of order where none was expected, a feeling of significance written against the vast canvas of the night. These events are remembered not because of what they explained, but because of what they stirred: awe, wonder, humility. And perhaps that is the essence of communication at its most universal. Not words, but resonance. Not explanations, but impressions that bypass language and move directly into memory. Think of a great cathedral. Its stained glass tells stories, but even if you do not know the story, the light and color still move you. The architecture still lifts your eyes, still slows your breath. The meaning is larger than translation. The experience itself is enough. In the same way, the sky symbols may not need to be decoded. They may exist only to remind us that we are not alone, that the sky is alive, that the universe is capable of more than silence. Pilots who saw formations speak of the hush that followed. Entire neighborhoods recall standing together in shared stillness. These silences are not empty. They are full of attention, of presence, of recognition. Silence itself may be the punctuation that makes the symbol legible. Why do these moments matter? Because they shift perspective. A single witness may be doubted, but when thousands look upward together, when the same shape is seen by many eyes, it becomes part of collective memory. It becomes a story that no dismissal can erase, and the stories endure. Parents who saw the Phoenix Lights tell their children, who grow up with that memory as part of their family's history. Residents of Hudson Valley recall the summer nights when the sky itself seemed to lower in luminous triangles. Soldiers in Rendlesham carried their accounts for decades, whispering them to researchers when official channels remained silent. Symbols endure because they do not rely on authority. They live in memory. They live in feeling. They live in the hush that falls when something larger than us writes itself across the sky. Rest now with this thought: communication may not begin with conversation. It may begin with impression, with a presence that does not explain itself, but reveals itself, with a symbol too large to ignore, too quiet to forget. Some researchers argue that these sky formations, if genuine, are demonstrations, not attempts at secrecy, but at revelation. Not words spoken into a void, but shapes drawn for us to see. Perhaps they are rehearsals, or perhaps they are already the dialogue itself, a conversation conducted not with vocabulary but with geometry, with light, with silence. We may never know their full meaning, but meaning is not always the point. Sometimes the point is wonder. Sometimes the point is presence. Sometimes the point is simply to remind us that the sky is not empty, that the universe is not silent, that there are patterns beyond our own making. Close your eyes now and picture it. The wide desert sky, the hush of a summer night. Above you, lights hold their shape, a triangle, a circle, a great arc stretching across the horizon. You do not know what it means, but you know it means something. And in that knowing, you are part of the message. The chapter closes here, with the sky still open, still waiting, still writing its symbols. The constellations our ancestors named, the formations our pilots chased, the great arcs witnessed by entire towns. Together they form a story not of answers but of symbols, symbols that endure. Symbols that connect, symbols that speak without words. The silence lingers. The sky is not empty. It is a canvas, and sometimes it writes back. Chapter 4. The Forgotten Arts. Long before our alphabets took shape, long before paper and ink, there were other ways of writing, ways that carried weight not only as communication, but as power. Symbols carved into stone, drawn in sand, inscribed on parchment with care. Some were letters, yes, but many were more than letters. They were signs of connection between the human and the divine, between the seen and the unseen. In ancient Mesopotamia, the first cuneiform tablets were not stories or poems, but lists of stars, inventories of offerings, calculations of cycles. The written word began as record, but woven into those lines were symbols that hinted at something greater, diagrams of constellations, charts of omens, marks that pointed from earth to sky. Egypt, too, left behind a forest of symbols. Hieroglyphs that carried layers of meaning, literal, poetic, and sacred, all at once. A bird could be a bird, but also a soul. A circle could be the sun, or eternity, or the eye of a god. To read such texts was not simply to decipher language. It was to step into a system where every mark shimmered with multiple meanings. In later centuries, traditions like the Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, treated letters themselves as holy. Each shape, each stroke, carried numerical value, hidden correspondences, cosmic resonance. To write was not only to record, but to participate in creation. The alphabet became more than a tool. It became a ladder reaching toward mystery. Other cultures guarded their own secret alphabets. The runes of the Norse, carved on stone and wood, were believed to carry protective power. They were not just characters, but forces. To carve a rune was to invoke its strength. The geomantic symbols of Africa and Arabia, drawn in patterns of dots and lines, carried the weight of divination, opening paths into unseen knowledge. Across the world, the forgotten arts remind us that writing was once more than communication. It was a bridge. Symbols did not only tell stories, they shaped reality. And in the modern era, when stories of UFO encounters rose into public consciousness, whispers of strange symbols returned. Witnesses spoke of markings on the sides of craft, etched into panels, glowing faintly in the night. Farmers at Roswell described beams littering their fields, covered with purple symbols, unlike any alphabet they knew, shapes that resembled hieroglyphs, yet felt wholly other. One rancher said, his children thought the marks looked like fairy tale letters. Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who gathered the debris, later recalled handling beams that were light as balsa wood, yet unbreakable. On them were lines of purple symbols, delicate but deliberate. They weren't letters, he said, but they had the precision of writing. Elsewhere, in accounts from Europe, witnesses described craft with panels bearing geometric glyphs, circles within circles, angular strokes, like fragments of an unknown script. Some remembered symbols glowing briefly before fading, as though meant to be glimpsed but not kept. The impression was not of random decoration, but of communication. A message etched not for reading, but for recognition. Close your eyes and imagine holding such an artifact. A beam smooth as glass, impossibly light. Across it, symbols shimmer, unfamiliar, yet ordered. You cannot translate them, but you feel them. A spiral that suggests movement. A triangle that whispers of balance. A curve that hints at connection. You cannot read the language, yet it speaks to you all the same. This is the paradox of symbols in encounters with the unknown. They are seen, but not deciphered. They are remembered, but not explained. And perhaps that is their purpose. Perhaps they are not meant to be read as sentences, but felt as impressions. A communication that bypasses the mind and goes directly to the deeper places where meaning resides. In mystical traditions, the same idea persists, that symbols can work upon the soul even when the conscious mind cannot interpret them. A sigil drawn for protection is not understood, yet it calms. A mandala viewed in meditation does not need translation, yet it centers the spirit. The power is not in the dictionary definition, but in the resonance. So too, perhaps, with the symbols reported on debris, on craft, in the sky. They may not be an alphabet at all, but a form of art, an art that communicates not through clarity, but through presence. An art that reminds us of connection rather than spelling it out. This is why they are forgotten arts. Not because they vanished, but because we forgot how to read them. Not with our minds, but with our hearts, our instincts, our quietest knowing. As the chapter begins, let yourself drift into that space. A place where writing is not only record, but magic. A place where symbols carved in stone, painted on cave walls, etched into beams of wreckage, are all part of the same continuum. The continuum of forgotten alphabets, the continuum of sacred writing, the continuum of symbols that do not explain, but remind. The silence lingers. The symbols endure, and perhaps, in them a message has already been given. Throughout history, certain systems of symbols have been treated not merely as writing, but as vessels of hidden knowledge. Each mark was more than a sound. It was an echo of the cosmos, a fragment of truth, a door to another layer of reality. Consider the Kabbalah, rooted in Jewish mysticism. Its practitioners believed that the Hebrew letters themselves were alive with meaning. Each letter carried not only a phonetic value but a numerical one and a symbolic one. Combinations of letters were not simply words but formulas, resonances that aligned human consciousness with divine structure. To meditate on a letter was to step into dialogue with creation itself. The runes of the Norse carried similar weight. They were carved not casually, but with intent. To inscribe a rune on wood or stone was to invoke its power, protection, strength, guidance. Their names spoke of action: Algiz, the elk, for protection; Tiwaz, the spear, for victory; Ansuz, the god, for inspiration. To read the runes was to step into a world where every mark was also a force. In Africa and Arabia, geomancy developed as a practice of drawing dots and lines in the earth, generating patterns interpreted for guidance. These were not alphabets in the traditional sense, but systems of symbols that connected earth to heaven, chance to destiny. The marks carried meaning not because they were sentences, but because they mirrored the hidden order of the cosmos. These traditions remind us that alphabets were once more than tools of communication. They were keys. They were patterns that opened the mind to realms beyond the ordinary. And so, when modern witnesses describe seeing strange symbols on UFO debris or inside craft, the echo is unmistakable. They are not random marks. They carry the same aura as sacred alphabets of the past, mysterious, deliberate, resonant. At Roswell in 1947, rancher William Mack Brazel and others recalled beams of lightweight material marked with purple symbols. Major Jesse Marcel later described them as hieroglyphic-like, delicate, and precise. The marks were not letters or numbers known to human alphabets, yet they carried the authority of writing. Even children who handled them said they looked like fairy tale script, the kind you knew must mean something, even if you could not read it. Decades later, in accounts from abduction and contactee cases, individuals described seeing panels or consoles covered with symbols, glowing, shifting, sometimes appearing only for moments before vanishing. A man in New England recalled being shown a sequence of shapes, like geometric runes that seemed to embed themselves in his memory, though he could never reproduce them exactly. A woman in South America described markings on a craft that felt more like art than writing, but that nonetheless impressed themselves upon her with the weight of meaning. These testimonies, however fragile, suggest something profound: that if contact occurs, it may not come in plain speech, but in symbols closer to sacred alphabets than to modern language. Not words to be translated, but patterns to be felt. Close your eyes and picture such a scene. A small metallic beam, impossibly light. Across it, a sequence of shapes, a spiral, a line with branching points. A cluster of dots arranged in a pattern that suggests intention. You cannot say what they mean, yet you feel something stir. Recognition without translation. Resonance without grammar. In this sense, the forgotten alphabets of the past prepare us for the possibilities of the future. They show us that meaning can be layered, hidden, carried not only in sound but in structure. They remind us that writing is not always about words. Sometimes it is about alignment between the human and the divine, between the observer and the observed, between us and whatever else may share the sky. It is no accident that so many mystical traditions linked their symbols to stars. Kabbalists traced correspondences between letters and constellations. Runes were drawn on stones aligned to solstices. Geomancy mirrored the heavens with its chance-marked lines. In each case, symbols were not only of the earth, they pointed upward. They reminded their readers that communication stretched beyond the human sphere, and so too, perhaps, with the symbols described in modern encounters. They may be maps, or names, or something more abstract, impressions meant to resonate rather than instruct. Perhaps their purpose is not to tell us something, but to awaken something, not to explain, but to remind. This is the heart of the forgotten arts, that symbols endure even when their dictionaries are lost. A rune carved 1,000 years ago can still stir a sense of power. A Hebrew letter meditated upon today can still feel alive. A symbol glimpsed on strange debris can still whisper of intention, even when no translation exists. Rest with that thought. Imagine the continuum: ancient scribes etching cuneiform on clay, priests inscribing hieroglyphs on temple walls, shamans drawing patterns in the sand, farmers in Roswell handling beams marked with delicate purple glyphs, contactees describing glowing shapes that appeared for only moments. Across millennia, the same truth: symbols are not only to be read, they are to be felt. The forgotten arts are not forgotten at all. They wait, quiet, enduring, for us to remember how to listen. Stories of strange symbols are scattered like fragments appearing in the records of different times and places. Alone, each might seem curious but inconclusive. Together they form a pattern, a whisper that symbols may be the chosen language of encounters, not meant to be read, but to be felt. Roswell remains the most famous of these. In July 1947, after wreckage was discovered across the Foster Ranch in New Mexico, locals who handled the debris spoke of its peculiar properties. The material was thin yet resilient, folding without creasing, bending without breaking. But amid the shards and strips, one detail stood out: the presence of markings. Sheriff George Wilcox reportedly examined beams inscribed with delicate purple figures. Rancher Mac Brazel's family remembered children playing with fragments decorated with curious glyphs. Major Jesse Marcel, the base intelligence officer, recalled beams covered with symbols like hieroglyphics but not Egyptian. They were not letters, not numbers, but deliberate designs. The official explanation that followed, Weather Balloon then Project Mogul, never addressed those symbols. They lingered in testimony, unaccounted for, too odd to dismiss yet too fragile to confirm. What mattered most was not their translation, but their impression. Witnesses knew they had seen something manufactured, deliberate, significant. 3 decades later, in Rendlesham Forest, England, U.S. Air Force personnel stationed at RAF Woodbridge encountered strange lights in the woods. Deputy Base Commander Charles Halt and others reported beams moving through the trees, descending in intervals, forming patterns. But perhaps the most enduring detail was recorded by Sergeant Jim Peniston, who claimed to have approached a landed craft and touched its surface. He described symbols etched into its panels, geometric shapes, triangles within circles, lines and marks that seemed like part of an unknown script. Peniston later said that when he touched them, he felt a flood of impressions, as though meaning had bypassed words and entered directly into his mind. He would spend years afterward trying to reproduce the designs in notebooks, unable to forget their clarity. The details of the Rendlesham case are debated, but the presence of symbols remains one of its most curious aspects. For many it echoed Roswell, strange craft, strange marks, a sense that the symbols themselves mattered more than any other evidence. Then there are the quieter accounts, those not tied to headlines but carried in whispers. Abduction testimonies often include symbols shown on walls, screens, or objects inside craft. Some describe glowing glyphs that shifted and pulsed. Others speak of being shown sequences of shapes that seem to embed themselves in memory, impossible to reproduce yet unforgettable. One witness in Canada recalled being presented with what looked like a book filled with symbols, pages covered in rows of marks she could not read, but somehow recognized. It wasn't language, she said. It was more like music written down, except not music. It felt alive. Another, from South America, described symbols on a console that seemed to rearrange themselves as he looked. They weren't fixed, he said. They moved like light flowing into shape. The impression left him shaken, not because he understood them, but because he knew they were not random. Such accounts may never be proven, but the repetition is striking. From Roswell to Rendlesham to modern contactees, the same theme returns: symbols deliberate and resonant, presented in ways that bypass translation. Why symbols? Perhaps because words divide, but symbols unite. Words require grammar, dictionaries, agreement. Symbols require only recognition. A spiral means motion, a circle means wholeness, a triangle means balance. These impressions cross cultures, cross centuries. They may also cross worlds. In psychological terms, Carl Jung described symbols as archetypes, forms rising from the collective unconscious, carrying meaning deeper than reason. A mandala soothes without needing to be explained. A rune carved into stone feels powerful even when its origin is lost. The power lies not in translation, but in resonance. Perhaps the same is true of the marks seen on craft and debris. They may not be alphabets at all. They may be archetypes, shapes meant to stir recognition at a level beyond words. They may be reminders rather than explanations, impressions rather than instructions. Close your eyes now and imagine standing in that New Mexico field in 1947. The air smells of dust and rain after a storm. Across the ground lie fragments of something unearthly. You pick up a beam, impossibly light, and across it you see symbols, purple, delicate, deliberate. You cannot read them, yet you know they mean something. You feel it in your chest, in your silence, or picture yourself in Rendlesham Forest, the trees damp with winter mist. A craft rests on the ground, its surface smooth and metallic. You reach out, your hand trembling, and touch a symbol carved into its skin. For a moment, you feel as though a door has opened, not with words but with resonance. The meaning does not pass through your ears. It passes through your bones. These are the forgotten arts of communication, not alphabets in the ordinary sense, but bridges, not languages to be translated, but symbols to be felt. The forgotten arts remind us that not all messages need explanation. Some are meant only to awaken wonder, to stir curiosity, to remind us that the universe is larger, stranger, and more connected than we can easily say. And so the testimonies of ranchers, soldiers, and ordinary people merge into a single chorus. They saw symbols, they could not read them, but they remembered them. And in remembering, they became part of the message. The silence lingers, the symbols endure, the forgotten arts remain. We often assume that communication must be conscious, that words must be spoken, written, and translated before they carry meaning. But perhaps the deepest messages are not addressed to the waking mind at all. Dreams speak in symbols. They show us places we've never seen, faces we half recognize, patterns that defy logic yet feel profound. A door that never opens, a bird that turns to light, a spiral staircase rising without end. When we wake, we cannot always explain these images, yet we know they matter. We feel them lingering, whispering in the edges of memory. The same may be true of the symbols described in encounters with the unknown. They may not be for conscious decoding. They may be for the deeper layers of awareness, the subconscious, the intuitive, the archetypal. They may bypass the rational mind entirely, planting themselves in the soil of the soul where meaning grows quietly over time. Psychologists like Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, images that rise from the collective unconscious and carry meaning without explanation. The circle as wholeness, the shadow as fear, the light as revelation. These are not invented but discovered, repeating across cultures because they belong to all humanity. Perhaps the symbols reported on debris, on craft, on glowing panels are of the same order. Archetypes, not of humanity alone, but of consciousness itself. This might explain why those who see them cannot forget. Ranchers in Roswell, soldiers in Rendlesham, abductees in their strange visions, all described the same impression. The symbols remained, not because they were understood, but because they were felt. One witness put it plainly, "I couldn't read them, but I couldn't stop remembering them." Imagine for a moment that you are handed a page covered in glyphs. You cannot pronounce them, you cannot translate them, and yet, as you look, you feel calm, or unsettled, or awed. The meaning is not in the definition, the meaning is in the resonance. Art works this way too. A painting can move you without words. A piece of music can bring tears without translation. Meaning flows beneath the level of explanation. Perhaps this is the point. If an intelligence wanted to communicate across the gulf of worlds, what better way than through symbols that stir feeling rather than thought? Words divide, symbols unite. Words demand agreement on grammar. Symbols need only recognition. And so, perhaps the forgotten arts are not accidents of history, but blueprints for contact. Ancient scribes, mystics, and shamans treated symbols as bridges because they knew something we have forgotten, that the deepest truths are not spoken. They are shown. Consider again the testimonies. Roswell beams marked with delicate purple glyphs, Rendlesham panels carved with geometric shapes, abductees shown books of unreadable signs. Each case leaves behind the same residue, not translation, but impression. The witnesses may not know what the symbols said, but they knew they said something. It may even be that the act of seeing is enough, that the message lies not in meaning, but in memory. To see a strange symbol is to be changed by it. It lingers, it shapes, it haunts. It becomes part of the witness, part of the story, part of the collective. And perhaps this is the true purpose, not to explain, but to awaken. To open the mind, not with answers, but with questions. To plant seeds that grow quietly in the subconscious, blossoming over years into new ways of seeing. Close your eyes now and imagine a dream. You walk through a corridor of stone. On the walls are glowing glyphs, shifting and flowing. You cannot read them, but you feel them. Each one hums with meaning. Each one seems to look back at you, as though it is alive. You wake with the memory intact, unable to explain, yet forever changed. This is the language of symbols. This is why they endure. They do not argue. They do not instruct. They simply impress themselves upon us and remain. The forgotten arts, then, may not be forgotten at all. They may be alive, waiting in the margins of memory, reappearing when the sky lights with symbols or when fragments of strange debris are handled in trembling hands. They remind us that meaning is not always in words. Sometimes it is in shapes, in impressions, in resonance. And so, as this chapter closes, the lesson is simple and profound. Symbols are not meant to be read. They are meant to be remembered. The silence lingers, the symbols endure, and deep within, they continue to speak. Chapter 5. The Human Response. Symbols may arrive from the sky, but their echoes often take root in human imagination. Across centuries, the mysterious has not remained confined to the stars. It has flowed into art, music, and poetry, into the creative works of those who felt touched by something larger than themselves. When we look at the history of human creativity, we find moments when inspiration seems to arrive from beyond the ordinary. Artists speak of visions that descend suddenly, unbidden, as though whispered into their minds. Musicians describe melodies that come complete, as if dictated by an unseen hand. Poets write of words that feel not composed but received. The ancient Greeks had a name for this. The muse, to be inspired, was to be breathed into by a presence not of oneself. Creativity was not invention, but reception. Something flowed through the artist, using human hands and voices as vessels. Consider the Renaissance artist William Blake. Centuries later, he claimed to converse with angels, who showed him visions of strange figures and radiant symbols. His paintings and poems carried images of stars, wheels, and otherworldly beings, alive with a sense of communication from realms unseen. To skeptics, he was eccentric. To admirers, he was a prophet of symbols. Music, too, has long carried this sense of otherworldly origin. Mozart once said that his compositions came to him whole, like gifts fully formed. He felt less like a composer and more like a conduit, writing down what was already complete in his mind. Other musicians, from Bach to Coltrane, have spoken of moments when melodies seemed to arrive unbidden, carrying an order too intricate to claim as their own. In more recent times, stories of inspiration linked to the unknown echo with surprising clarity. The avant-garde composer Karlheinz Stockhausen claimed that some of his music was inspired by visions of beings from other worlds. He believed he was in contact with cosmic intelligences who guided his compositions. His works, filled with strange harmonies and celestial themes, were not merely art, but attempts at communication with the beyond. Poets, too, have carried this impression. Rainer Maria Rilke described his poems as dictated to him by a voice larger than his own, will be. Yeats immersed himself in automatic writing, convinced that unseen intelligences were speaking through his pen, offering lines filled with symbols and riddles. To him, creativity was not solitary but collaborative, a dialogue with presences just beyond the veil. Even outside the arts, ordinary people sometimes report sudden floods of imagery, music, or words after encounters with strange phenomena. Contactees in the mid-20th century often returned from their experiences with sketches of glyphs or melodies they claimed to have heard during their visions. Some drew intricate geometric patterns they insisted were not of their invention. Others hummed tones they could not explain, describing them as the music of the visitors. These accounts, whether accepted or dismissed, reveal something profound, that human creativity is often the space where mystery lands. If the unknown wishes to communicate, perhaps it does not always use direct channels. Perhaps it flows instead into art, into song, into verse, into the human impulse to create. Close your eyes now and imagine an artist at work. The room is quiet, the candle burns low. He leans over his sketchbook, his hand moving faster than thought. Shapes appear, spirals, stars, faces not quite human. He does not know where they come from, only that they must be drawn. When the page is filled, he sets down the pen, astonished, as if the work has created itself. Or picture a musician, sitting alone at a piano. Her fingers find notes without plan. A melody emerges, haunting and luminous, repeating like an echo from elsewhere. She plays it again and again, until it fills the room. Later, when asked, she says she did not compose it. She only remembered it, as though she had always known. This is the human response to symbols and whispers from beyond, to create. To shape the ineffable into forms we can share, to turn resonance into music, impressions into images, fleeting dreams into poems. It is possible, of course, that this is all internal, that visions, melodies, and poems arise from the depths of our own minds. But it is just as possible that the human mind is an open window, capable of receiving as well as generating. If so, then perhaps the arts are not only human expression, but cosmic conversation. The forgotten symbols carved into cave walls, the tones described in encounters with strange craft, the glyphs seen on wreckage, the music that arrives in dreams. Together they may form a dialogue not in words but in creativity. Artists, musicians, and poets are the interpreters. Their works may not explain, but they resonate. They remind us that meaning is not only in translation, it is also in impression, in beauty, in wonder. Rest with that thought, that every song, every poem, every painting may be more than human. That some works may carry echoes of the stars, that creativity itself may be a form of contact. The silence lingers, the art endures, and through it, perhaps the cosmos speaks. When people speak of receiving inspiration from beyond themselves, the accounts often carry the same tone, a quiet certainty that what emerged was not entirely their own. Automatic writing has long been one of the clearest examples. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, spiritualists gathered in parlors, pencils poised over paper, allowing their hands to move without conscious control. Words and symbols spilled across the page. Some were nonsense, others poetry, still others sequences of shapes that seemed more like alphabets than sentences. The poet W.B. Yeats and his wife, Georgie Hidleys, practiced automatic writing for years. Yeats believed the words that emerged were communications from unseen teachers. Their pages were filled not only with phrases but with diagrams, spirals, and symbols. Yeats treated these writings not as curiosities, but as revelations, weaving them into his great work, a vision. For him, the unseen spoke not in paragraphs but in patterns. In the 20th century, contactees, people who claimed encounters with beings from other worlds, often described similar processes. They would return from experiences, compelled to write or draw. Some produced long texts, insisting they were dictated by entities beyond Earth. Others filled notebooks with glyphs they could not interpret, but could not stop repeating. One man in the 1950s covered page after page with looping symbols he swore were part of an alien language. He could not read them, but he felt they carried weight. Artists, too, have spoken of visions that seemed to come from elsewhere. The painter Hilma af Klint, working in Sweden at the turn of the 20th century, created vast canvases of spirals, circles, and geometric forms she said were guided by higher intelligences. Long before modern abstract art, she produced works that looked startlingly cosmic, like star maps, like messages written in shape and color. She insisted the paintings were not hers alone. She was a channel, she said, for a communication meant for the future. The same is true of many musicians. Sun Ra, the American jazz band leader, claimed he had been taken aboard a spacecraft and shown visions of Saturn. His music, filled with cosmic themes and unusual harmonies, was his way of transmitting what he had seen. He told his audiences he was not just playing songs, he was sharing messages from beyond. Even Carl Jung, the great psychologist, found himself touched by something that felt larger than the self. In his private red book, he recorded visions filled with symbols, mandalas, spirals, figures that seemed archetypal and universal. He came to believe that symbols are the true language of the unconscious and perhaps of the cosmos itself. For Jung, to dream of a circle was not only personal, it was universal. It was the psyche speaking in the same way the stars might speak, through archetypes, through images, through shapes. Close your eyes now and picture a writer at a desk. His hand moves quickly, almost faster than thought, sketching symbols he cannot explain. He does not stop to analyze. He only writes, compelled by something that presses through him. When he finishes, the page is filled with marks that seem both foreign and familiar. He stares at them, knowing he cannot read them, yet sensing they carry a message nonetheless. Or picture a painter in her studio, standing before a canvas. She feels her hand guided, as though pulled by an unseen current. Shapes unfold, spirals, radiant suns, starbursts of color. She steps back and realizes she has painted not only an image but an impression, a resonance that moves viewers, even if they cannot say why. These are the human responses to encounters with the unknown, not translation, but creativity. Not explanation, but expression. Symbols pass into the hands of artists and emerge as visions, paintings, poems, songs. It is worth noting how often these creations resemble what others describe in encounters. The spirals, the circles, the glyphs, they reappear in both ancient art and modern testimonies. This continuity suggests that perhaps the creative mind is tuned to the same frequencies as the phenomena themselves, that art is not only personal, but participatory, part of a larger conversation. To dismiss such works as imagination misses the point. Imagination itself may be the channel. The mind may not invent in isolation, but receive, interpret, transform. What comes through may not be literal. It may not be meant to be read like a book. It may be meant to be felt, to awaken curiosity, to remind us of connection. Rest with this thought: creativity may be contact. A painting filled with spirals, a melody that feels like it came from the stars, a poem that seems dictated from a dream. These may not be fantasies, they may be messages carried in human form, shaped into art so that others may feel what cannot be explained. The silence lingers, the art endures, and through it, the cosmos may already be speaking. Across cultures, across centuries, the same symbols repeat: spirals carved into stone, circles drawn in sand, beings sketched with radiant heads or wings of light. They appear in myths, in art, in dreams, and when modern witnesses describe what they see, the echoes are uncanny. This is what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, a reservoir of images that belong not to individuals but to humanity itself. Jung believed that archetypes emerge from this shared inner realm, surfacing in stories, visions, and symbols that cross boundaries of culture and time. The hero, the mother, the shadow, the circle. We all dream them because they are woven into us. What if some of these archetypes are more than human? What if the repeating images, the spirals, the radiant beings, the strange glyphs are not only from within us, but also from beyond us? When Jung studied the growing UFO phenomenon in the mid-20th century, he suggested that flying saucers were technological mandalas, symbols of wholeness appearing at a time of global anxiety. To him, they were psychic projections as much as physical objects, manifestations of a human need for unity. But he also left space for mystery. Perhaps the symbols were not entirely ours. Perhaps they arrived from elsewhere, shaping themselves in forms we could recognize. It is striking how often encounters with the unknown include archetypal images. Contactees speak of radiant beings of light, much like angels in religious traditions. Abductees recall spirals and circles shown to them, much like the symbols carved by ancient hands. Witnesses describe glyphs that feel like language yet resist translation, much like mystical alphabets. One possibility is that these images flow from the same collective well. Another is that they are deliberately chosen, that if something seeks to communicate with us, it does so through the symbols already alive in our unconscious. Why speak in words? When words divide, why not speak in archetypes? When archetypes unite, this may explain why artists so often feel they are channels. Their visions are not just personal, they are part of a larger pattern, tapping into the same reservoir that myths, dreams, and encounters draw from. When Hilma A.F. Clint painted spirals and radiant suns, when William Blake drew winged figures, when poets wrote of luminous beings, they were perhaps responding to the same archetypes that appear in abduction accounts and UFO testimonies. Close your eyes now and picture this continuum. A shaman in a cave, sketching spirals on stone, a medieval monk, illuminating a manuscript with radiant circles, a modern painter, filling a canvas with geometric glyphs, a witness in a New Mexico desert, holding a beam marked with purple symbols, different times, different hands, the same images. The archetypes may be timeless, but their recurrence suggests a dialogue. Communication, not as vocabulary, but as resonance, not as words, but as impressions shared across millennia. This also explains why so many cultures have myths of sky beings, star visitors, gods descending in light. The details differ: feathered serpents in Mesoamerica, shining chariots in India, winged messengers in Greece, but the core is the same. Beings from beyond bring symbols, knowledge, or visions. Humanity responds not by translating, but by weaving the impressions into myth, art, and story. In this way, alien communication may not be future tense. It may already be happening, folded into the stories we tell, the symbols we carve, the music we compose. It may not come as a radio signal or a written message. It may come as archetypes stirring within us, guiding us to create, to imagine, to remember. Think of dreams again. One dreamer sees a spiral staircase, another, across the world, dreams the same. They have never met, but their visions overlap. Something larger than individual memory seems at work. If dreams can carry shared symbols, why not encounters? Why not art? Why not culture itself as the medium of communication? This thought is calming, almost reassuring. We do not need to wait for contact. We may already be in it. The paintings, poems, myths, and melodies that feel larger than ourselves may already be messages, not in the sense of direct instructions, but in the sense of resonance, reminders that we are part of a greater whole. Rest with that possibility now, that when you see a spiral carved on stone, when you hear a melody that feels timeless, when you read a story of luminous beings, you are participating in communication that stretches beyond humanity. You are part of a dialogue older than language, broader than culture, deeper than memory. The human response to such communication is not only fear or curiosity, it is creation. We make art, we compose music, we tell stories, we turn impressions into forms that others can feel. In doing so, we pass the message forward. Even if we cannot explain it, we ensure it endures. The silence lingers, the archetypes endure, and through them, perhaps, the cosmos speaks. At the heart of all these stories lies one unifying thread: creativity as a bridge. Whether in poetry, painting, music, or myth, humanity has always responded to mystery, not with silence, but with expression. What cannot be explained is turned into symbol. What cannot be spoken is sung. What cannot be proven is painted. In this way, creativity itself becomes the receiver, the antenna through which impressions from the unknown take shape. Consider the poet who feels words arrive faster than thought, tumbling onto the page. Or the musician who dreams a melody and wakes with it fully formed, as though remembered rather than invented. Or the painter who feels her hand guided, tracing lines and spirals that seem familiar yet unbidden. These experiences share a quality of reception, the sense that the human is not origin but channel. For those who believe in contact from beyond, this is perhaps the most natural way it could occur. Why expect a radio signal when the human mind is already tuned to receive impressions? Why wait for a landing when the landing may already have happened in the realm of imagination? Creativity becomes the stage where communication unfolds, subtle, symbolic, untranslatable, yet undeniable. This would explain why so many testimonies of contact result not in clear messages but in art. Witnesses return with sketches of glyphs, with melodies hummed under their breath, with dreams that feel like instructions. They may not understand, but they create, and in creating, they pass the impression onward. Art, then, is not only expression, it is preservation. It holds the impressions so they do not fade. A painting endures, a song lingers, a poem carries symbols into future ears and eyes. Even if the original meaning is lost, the resonance remains. A spiral carved into stone 10,000 years ago still stirs awe today. A melody composed centuries ago still moves listeners across cultures. The message may never be translated, but it is never silenced. Perhaps this is the true nature of alien communication, not a broadcast waiting to be decoded, but a stream of impressions that flow into human creativity, ensuring they survive across time. Close your eyes and imagine this process. A spark from beyond touches a human mind. The mind feels compelled, restless, inspired. The hand moves across paper, across canvas, across strings. The result is a work of art, not entirely human, not entirely other, but something in between. It enters the world and begins its journey, carried through generations, resonating long after the origin is forgotten. We see this pattern in myth, stories of gods descending from the sky, of luminous beings bearing knowledge, of symbols shown in visions, all become woven into cultural memory. Whether literal or symbolic, they endure because they were told, painted, sung. Creativity transformed encounter into heritage. We see it in sacred architecture, temples aligned with stars, mandalas carved in stone, labyrinths traced in earth, structures that embody patterns beyond ordinary utility. They are not just buildings, they are messages in geometry, preserved through design. We see it in modern accounts as well, abductees compelled to draw glyphs, contactees writing automatic texts, artists producing works they insist were guided by unseen hands. These may not convince skeptics, but they reveal a continuity. When the unknown brushes against the human, it is creativity that catches the imprint. And so the human response to mystery may be more important than the mystery itself. What matters is not whether we can explain every encounter, but whether we carry the impressions forward. A culture that ignores its artists, ignores its receivers. A world that silences its poets, silences its bridges. Creativity is not a luxury, it is the way we remain in dialogue with the unknown. Rest in this thought, now, that when you listen to music, when you look at a painting, when you read a story that stirs something deep, you may be participating in communication larger than any individual. You may be touching the same resonance that stirred the artist, the same impression that moved through them, the same message that began far beyond their conscious mind. The cosmos may not speak to us in paragraphs. It may not send us sentences across the void. It may instead move in symbols, in tones, in archetypes, in dreams. And creativity is the receiver, the translator, the vessel. Through us the impressions take form. Through art, they endure. As chapter 5 closes, we carry this reminder forward, that perhaps every painting, every poem, every song is not only human. It may also be a whisper from elsewhere, not to be explained but to be felt, not to be decoded but to be remembered. The silence lingers, the art endures, and through it, the cosmos may already be speaking. Chapter 6. Patterns in Silence. Not all communication comes from symbols shown. Sometimes it comes from symbols suppressed. For decades, the phenomenon of the men in black has shadowed stories of UFO encounters. They appear after the lights in the sky, after the photographs are taken, after the fragments are found. Always the same: black suits, pale faces, questions that cut straight to the evidence. They do not shout. They do not threaten openly. They move with quiet authority, and when they leave, silence follows. To many, they are government agents, investigators ensuring national security. To others, they are stranger, almost theatrical in their precision, their uncanny presence. Whatever their origin, their effect is clear: to take away words, to erase testimony, to ensure that what remains is absence. This absence itself becomes a kind of pattern. A witness speaks, evidence surfaces, visitors arrive. The story falls silent. Consider the case of Rex Heflin, a highway inspector in Santa Ana, California. In 1965, he photographed a disc-shaped object hovering in the sky, images taken in daylight with a Polaroid camera. The photographs were clear, structured, compelling. Days later, men arrived. They asked for the originals. They left with them. The pictures never returned. Afterward, Heflin noticed a black sedan watching his home, lingering near his office. Conversations grew tense. His colleagues whispered. He became quieter, more guarded. The silence pressed in. Or take the Rankins in New Jersey, civilian UFO researchers in the 1960s. They collected letters, clippings, witness accounts. Then came the disturbances, clicks on their phone, voices echoing back, cars idling near their home. Men in dark suits arrived, asking questions in tones too precise, too rehearsed. Afterward, the Rankins grew cautious, their work slowed, their voices dimmed. The silence spread. What makes these stories remarkable is not only the intimidation, but the method. The visitors rarely destroyed evidence in plain sight. Instead, they created an atmosphere where silence seemed safer than speech. The pressure was subtle, psychological. A knock at the door, a voice on the phone, a presence in the street. The message was not spoken, but it was understood. And here lies the paradox. In their very suppression, the men in black may reveal something deeper. Their silence becomes a pattern. Their absences form a shape. Their suppression of words highlights the possibility that the true communication was never in words at all. Witnesses often recall the uncanny precision of these figures, their pale faces, their rehearsed speech, their strange movements. Some felt less like they were speaking to men, and more like they were facing symbols in human form. Archetypes of authority, personifications of silence, embodiments of suppression. In this sense, the men in black themselves may be a kind of communication, not as individuals, but as symbols. Close your eyes and picture the scene. A knock at night, two men at the door. Their suits are crisp, their faces pale, their voices flat. They ask their questions without emotion, without warmth. You answer carefully, feeling the weight of their gaze. When they leave, they do not threaten. They do not explain. They simply vanish into the dark. Yet the silence they leave behind is heavier than any words. This silence is not empty. It is deliberate. It carries meaning. It says what you saw belongs no longer to you. It says speech is dangerous. Silence is safe. The words are absent, but the message is clear. This may be the forgotten language of suppression, a language that communicates not by telling, but by erasing, not by speaking, but by reminding. The men in black may not deliver information, they deliver silence, and in doing so they shape the narrative as powerfully as any spoken message. In a way, their presence mirrors the symbols we have traced across art and sky. A triangle of lights is a pattern that needs no translation. A pair of men in black suits at the door is also a pattern. It repeats across testimonies, across decades, across continents. The repetition itself becomes the symbol. The meaning is not in the detail of their words, but in the impression they leave. Silence, suppression, control. Researchers have long noted this. Each case carries variations, different names, different locations, different evidence, but the men in black appear with such consistency that they form their own archetype. They are no longer merely agents in stories. They are symbols of the silence that follows the extraordinary. And so when we think of communication from beyond, we must not only think of what is shown, but of what is hidden. Not only of what is spoken, but of what is silenced. The patterns of suppression may themselves be messages, whispering that something worth hiding has already been revealed. Rest in this thought. Silence itself can be language. Absence itself can be presence. Suppression itself can be communication. The men in black may not speak with clarity, but their silence says enough. The stories change in their details, but their rhythm remains the same. A witness sees something extraordinary. Evidence is gathered, photographs, debris, testimony. Then the visitors arrive, and afterward, silence. In this rhythm lies a pattern, one that echoes across decades and continents. Take the case of Dr. Herbert Hopkins in 1976. He was a physician in Maine, assisting in a local UFO investigation. One evening he received a call from a man claiming to be a fellow researcher. Minutes later, there was a knock at his door. The man who entered wore a perfect black suit and a derby hat. His skin was pale, his lips unnaturally red, his movements mechanical. He asked questions with unnerving precision. At one point he produced a coin which seemed to dissolve into nothing between his fingers. Then, without raising his voice, he instructed Hopkins to cease his work. That night, Hopkins destroyed every UFO file in his possession. He withdrew from research, closed the door on colleagues, and grew more private in his daily life. The visitor had not shouted, he had not threatened, he had simply spoken with finality, leaving behind silence. Another case unfolded in 1947, just weeks after the first great wave of flying saucer reports. In Puget Sound, Washington, Harold Dahl claimed to have seen discs in the sky that ejected molten debris, injuring his son and killing his dog. Soon after, he was approached by a man in a black suit at a diner. The man recounted the incident in precise detail, as though he had witnessed it himself. Then he warned Dahl that it would be safer if he forgot. Within days, Dahl retracted his story publicly. His silence became part of the record. In 1965, in Tallahassee, Florida, schoolteacher Shirley Cromartie reported seeing a disc drift silently over the tree line. Days later, two men in dark suits appeared at her door. They questioned her in clipped tones, presenting vague papers with a crude security stamp. They asked not for cooperation, but for silence. Do not repeat, do not speak, do not remember. Afterward, she found drawers disturbed, cars idling near her home, her telephone echoing her own words. The pressure was constant, yet subtle. Eventually, she grew cautious, withdrawn, and the story slipped into whispers. These stories, distant in time and place, carry the same choreography. A sighting, a visit, a silence. The pattern itself becomes the message. The men in black may not be investigators in the ordinary sense. They may be actors in a script whose outcome is always the same. The witness steps back, the evidence disappears, the story fades. And yet, paradoxically, the repetition ensures the pattern survives. The details blur, but the symbol remains. The black suit, the pale face, the silent authority. Each story reinforces the archetype, until the men in black become less individuals than symbols themselves, symbols of suppression, personifications of silence. It is striking how often witnesses describe them in mechanical terms, speech that feels rehearsed, movements that seem too precise, faces drained of warmth. It is as though they are not men at all but representations, living glyphs, embodiments of the very absence they enforce. To encounter them is to encounter silence in human form. Close your eyes and imagine the moment. A knock on the door. Two figures in suits. Their voices are flat, their words stripped of inflection. They ask questions you cannot avoid. They leave without ceremony. When they are gone, the silence left behind feels louder than any threat. You draw the curtains earlier. You lower your voice. You hesitate before telling your story again. Their visit has done its work. This is how suppression becomes communication. Not through overt commands, but through impression. The men in black need not convince. They need only to appear, to ask, to leave. The pattern itself delivers the message. Speak less, remember quietly, let the silence grow. And so, across decades, the same symbolic script repeats. In Santa Ana, a highway inspector hands over photographs. In Old Orchard Beach, a doctor burns his files. In New Jersey, a pair of researchers find their home visited and their work slowed. In Florida, a teacher withdraws into guarded silence. Each story, taken alone, could be dismissed, but together they form a tapestry too consistent to ignore. Not one man's paranoia, not one town's rumor, but a pattern woven across continents, a pattern of silence following speech, absence following presence, suppression following revelation. What does this mean? Perhaps nothing more than secrecy. But perhaps, too, it is communication of another kind. The men in black may not only seek to silence, they may also seek to remind that what is seen is significant, that what is silenced still matters, that presence itself is message enough. The paradox is almost poetic. By suppressing speech, they ensure the silence itself speaks. By erasing details, they leave behind the shape of absence. By intimidating witnesses, they create memories more lasting than evidence. Rest now in that thought, that silence can be as loud as words, that suppression can itself be communication, that absence can become presence. The pattern endures, the silence lingers, and in the end, the men in black remain symbols as much as men. When we look across the stories of the men in black, one detail becomes clear. Their actions are less about information than about impression. They do not provide answers. They do not engage in dialogue. They arrive, they unsettle, they erase. And in that erasure, a deeper pattern emerges, one that mirrors the very symbols we have already traced through art, music, and sky. The symbols carved on cave walls were not alphabets in the ordinary sense. They were impressions, spirals, circles, lines that carried resonance beyond translation. The tones described in UFO encounters are not songs with lyrics. They are harmonies that bypass words, settling directly into the body. The formations of lights across the heavens do not spell sentences. They form shapes that stir recognition without grammar. The men in black belong to this same continuum. Their presence is not language, but symbol. They are archetypes in human form. Dark suits, pale faces, rehearsed speech, their consistency across decades, across continents, across witnesses, makes them into living glyphs. The details may shift, but the shape remains. To see them is to encounter silence embodied. To remember them is to carry the impression of absence. To tell their story is to pass on the symbol of suppression. This is why their role is so enduring, not because of what they say. Their words are rarely memorable, but because of what they represent. They are less investigators than icons, less agents than archetypes. Like the spiral in stone, like the triangle of lights in the sky, they communicate through repetition, through presence, through resonance. Consider the rhythm of their appearances. A witness speaks, evidence emerges. The visitors arrive, the story fades. This rhythm is as structured as any chant, as deliberate as any ritual. It is not the words that matter, but the pattern itself. A pattern that reinforces silence as symbol, suppression as message. Psychologists might call this conditioning. Sociologists might call it control. But from a symbolic perspective, it is something more. It is communication without speech, archetype without explanation. It is silence as a language in itself. Close your eyes and imagine the pattern as music. Not notes rising and falling, but chords struck and held. Each visitation is a note, low and steady, pressed into memory. Together across decades, they form a harmony of suppression, a silent symphony, reminding us that what is hidden still matters, that what is silenced still speaks. In this sense, the men in black mirror the symbols in the sky. Just as a triangle of lights communicates presence without words, so two figures in suits at a doorstep communicate authority without explanation. Just as glyphs on debris stir recognition without translation, so the repeated archetype of pale faces and flat voices stirs unease without argument. The communication is not in the detail, it is in the impression, and impressions endure. The Roswell debris may be gone, but the memory of its symbols remains. The Phoenix lights may be explained away, but the impression of their formation endures. The men in black may leave no records, but the memory of their silence lingers. All belong to the same language, the language of resonance, a language that does not persuade but imprints, that does not instruct but reminds. It may even be that this is deliberate, that if something beyond us seeks to communicate, it does not only show symbols in the sky or carve them on debris, it also sends symbols in human form, archetypes designed to embody silence, to remind us that what cannot be spoken may still be present. Whether government operatives, psychological projections, or something stranger still, the men in black have taken root in our collective imagination. They are no longer just characters in individual testimonies. They are symbols now, woven into the broader tapestry of mystery. They are the glyphs of suppression, the archetypes of silence, and in this way, they participate in the same communication as the symbols in stone, the tones in the air, the lights in the sky. They remind us that contact is not always about clarity. Sometimes it is about impression. Sometimes it is about what lingers, not what explains. Rest with that thought. The universe may speak not in paragraphs, but in patterns, not in speeches, but in silences, not in alphabets, but in archetypes. The men in black, unsettling though they are, may be part of this same lexicon, a reminder that suppression itself can carry meaning, that silence itself can be a message. The silence lingers, the pattern endures, and through it, the cosmos may already be speaking. Silence has always carried meaning. A pause in conversation can speak louder than words. A moment of stillness in music can be as powerful as the note that follows. A blank space in a painting can frame the entire image. In this way, silence is not emptiness. It is presence in another form. The men in black remind us of this truth. Their visits are not remarkable for what they say, but for what they leave unsaid. Their words fade quickly. Their silence lingers. It presses in on the witness, shaping memory, altering behavior, changing the story's course. To be silenced is not the same as being ignored. It is to feel the weight of attention, to know that one's voice was heard enough to be erased. This paradox is why the stories endure. The silence itself becomes the message. The same is true in other domains of life. Monks take vows of silence not to erase themselves, but to deepen their presence. Lovers fall into quiet moments where no words are needed. Musicians allow a rest in the score to give the notes around it more weight. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is another mode of it. In encounters with the unknown, silence may play the same role. The triangle of lights above a city does not explain itself. It remains silent, and in that silence the witnesses find awe. The glyphs on Roswell debris do not translate into words. They remain silent, and in that silence they stir curiosity. The men in black do not reveal the truth. They remain silent, and in that silence they become symbols of suppression and mystery. Perhaps silence is the universal constant of communication, the ground on which all symbols, all tones, all impressions are drawn. Without silence there is no contrast, no rhythm, no form. Silence is the canvas. Words and symbols are only brushstrokes upon it. Close your eyes and imagine a great symphony. The orchestra swells with sound, then stops suddenly. The silence that follows vibrates with its own energy, as though the music still lingers in the air. The audience holds its breath, knowing that silence is part of the composition. So too with communication from beyond. The pauses, the gaps, the absences may be as meaningful as the symbols and tones themselves. Think again of the men in black. Their presence is brief, their silence is lasting. They are like rests in a cosmic score, interruptions that shape the melody of testimony, ensuring that the silence becomes part of the story. This is why suppression does not erase mystery. It amplifies it. By attempting to silence, the men in black create a resonance that endures longer than words could. Witnesses may fall quiet, but their silence becomes a symbol, a pattern repeated across decades. In the end, silence itself becomes the loudest communication. There is a deep comfort in this thought. If the universe communicates in symbols, tones, and silences, then nothing is truly lost. Even when words are erased, the impression remains. Even when evidence vanishes, the memory endures. Even when witnesses fall silent, their silence becomes part of the message. Perhaps this is why silence feels so heavy in these stories. It is not empty, it is full. It carries the weight of what cannot be spoken, what cannot be explained, what cannot be translated. It is communication of another order. Art teaches us this. The empty space on a canvas allows the colors to breathe. Poetry shows us this. The line break carries as much weight as the words. Music reminds us of this. The pause is what makes the note sing. Silence is never absence. It is the vessel of presence, so too in the cosmos. If others seek to communicate with us, they may do so in silence as much as in symbol, not by speaking, but by showing, not by explaining, but by impressing, not by filling the sky with words, but by leaving us with patterns that linger in memory and silences that echo in the soul. Rest with this thought, that silence itself may be the purest communication. The pause between tones, the blank between symbols, the hush after the visitors leave. These are not voids, they are messages. They remind us that communication does not always mean explanation. Sometimes it means presence without speech. The chapter closes here, with silence as its final note. The men in black vanish into the dark. Their words are forgotten. Their silence remains. The glyphs are unreadable. Their impression endures. The lights in the sky fade. Their shapes are remembered. The silence lingers. The pattern endures. And in the end, silence itself may be the language we have been hearing all along. Chapter 7. The Burden of Memory. When the lights fade, when the visitors leave, when the silence closes in, the witnesses remain, and for them, the story does not end. To see something extraordinary is not simply to experience a moment. It is to carry that moment forward, folded into daily life, coloring every breath that follows. The burden is not only what was seen, but the weight of holding it. For many, the memory arrives like a dream too vivid to forget. They try to set it aside, but it lingers in corners of the mind, surfacing in quiet moments, a triangle of lights above the desert, a hum that vibrated through bone, a pair of pale faces at the door. These impressions settle not like memories of ordinary events, but like symbols that refuse to fade. Take the farmer who saw lights pass over his field. He told no one but his wife, fearing ridicule. Yet each night he stepped onto his porch and looked upward, unable to stop searching for the pattern again. For years the memory remained his private ritual, half comfort, half burden, or the pilot who chased a formation across the clouds. On his log, he wrote only unidentified, nothing more. But in interviews decades later, his voice trembled. He admitted he could never quite shake the memory, the silence, the precision, the feeling that the sky itself had spoken to him in shape and motion. These are not just recollections, they are imprints, memories that act less like photographs and more like archetypes, alive, insistent, impossible to file away. Witnesses often describe the aftermath in terms of isolation. They hold the memory quietly, sharing it rarely, for fear of disbelief. Families sometimes know, but friends do not. Colleagues hear nothing. The burden is private, but heavy, and yet, silence does not erase it. On the contrary, silence often makes it sharper. What is not spoken grows more luminous within. What is not explained grows heavier in the heart. For many witnesses, the memory becomes a lifelong companion, uninvited, untranslatable, unforgettable. Some carry it with pride. They feel chosen, marked by the encounter, reminded that the universe is wider than most believe. Others carry it with unease, unsettled by what they cannot explain, haunted by a silence they never asked to inherit. One woman, who claimed to see symbols glowing on the surface of a craft, said that decades later she still dreamed of them. The shapes rose in her sleep, shifting and rearranging, reminding her of the night in the forest when she first saw them. She never learned what they meant, but the burden of remembering was constant. It was like carrying a song I could never finish, she said. A man who described hearing a low hum during an encounter admitted that the sound followed him for years. At times in quiet rooms, he thought he heard it again, vibrating faintly at the edge of perception. Whether imagined or real, it did not matter. The memory had embedded itself so deeply that his life was lived with a constant undertone, a resonance from the past. Close your eyes now and imagine carrying such a burden. You see lights above a neighborhood, you hear tones no one else hears, you feel silence pressing heavier than sound. Days pass, then years, but the memory never leaves. It becomes a quiet rhythm within your life, shaping your choices, your beliefs, your silence. This is why the burden of memory is not only about experience, it is about endurance. The witness endures the memory, sometimes alone, sometimes in whispers to those they trust. They endure the weight of knowing, or at least believing, that they saw something others will not accept. They endure the gap between their impression and the silence that follows. Researchers who have interviewed hundreds of witnesses note the same phenomenon. The memories grow sharper over time, not dimmer. Unlike ordinary recollections that fade with age, these remain bright, polished by repetition in the mind. They are told and retold internally, like mantras, like haunting refrains, and often they are not stories of clarity. They are stories of fragments, a symbol glimpsed, a sound felt, a face too pale, yet the fragments themselves are enough. They form symbols in memory, archetypes that settle deeply and refuse to leave. Perhaps this is the point, that communication from beyond is not meant to be resolved quickly. It is meant to linger, to seed itself in the soil of memory, to grow over years into something larger than the original moment. The burden is not only heavy, it may also be purposeful. In this sense, witnesses become carriers of symbols. They are like scribes who saw a glyph once and hold it forever. They are like musicians who heard a tone once and hum it all their lives. They are like dreamers who glimpse archetypes and cannot stop seeing them, even in waking hours. Rest with that thought, that memory itself may be the medium of communication, not radio signals, not transmissions, not words, but impressions that never fade, carried by witnesses across decades, woven into culture by their quiet persistence. The burden of memory is real, but it is also the bridge by which the unknown endures among us. The silence lingers, the memory endures, and through it, the symbols live on. When memory lingers, it does not stay still, it changes the life around it. Witnesses carry more than recollection. They carry transformation. Some find the memory seeping into their dreams. The lights return at night, reshaped in sleep into patterns that grow stranger, symbols that rearrange themselves in endless variations. For these witnesses, the encounter never ended. It continues in the theater of the mind, repeating across decades like a play with no final act. One man described dreaming of spirals after seeing strange lights in his youth. Night after night, the same pattern emerged, a spiral opening, unfolding, drawing him inward. He never understood its meaning, yet the dream became part of his identity. It followed me through my life, he said. Every time I closed my eyes, it reminded me. Others turn to creation. Painters fill canvases with circles, triangles, glowing orbs, unable to stop repeating the symbols they once saw. Writers compose poems or stories that echo their memories, disguising the details but carrying the same impressions. Musicians describe melodies that rise from nowhere, tones that seem to echo the hums they once felt in the presence of craft. Creativity becomes a way of carrying the burden, transforming it into form, ensuring it does not remain locked in silence. Some keep their memories in secret notebooks, hidden in drawers or attics. These journals carry sketches of glyphs, accounts of lights, descriptions of silence. They are not always meant to be read by others. They are meant as anchors, as proof to themselves that the experience was real. A private dialogue with the memory that refuses to fade. There are also those who become seekers. They cannot leave the memory behind, so they follow it forward. They read books, join groups, attend conferences. They travel to deserts and forests, standing where others once reported lights, hoping for another glimpse. Their lives bend around the axis of the memory, drawn into a quiet pilgrimage of search. Close your eyes and picture one such seeker. A woman, retired now, traveling with a small group into the Nevada desert. She carries a journal filled with sketches of triangles she saw in her youth. Each night she sits beneath the stars, scanning the horizon, waiting for the pattern to return. She knows she may never see it again, yet still she looks. The memory is not only in the past, it is her compass, her orientation. For some, the burden becomes heavy. They withdraw, reluctant to share, wary of ridicule. Families may not understand, friends may dismiss. The memory then becomes a solitary companion, at once comforting and isolating. One man admitted he stopped telling the story altogether. It was easier to carry it alone, he said, but it never left me, not once. And yet, even in silence, the burden shapes them. It changes how they see the world. It softens their certainty, opens their questions, deepens their sense of mystery. Some grow more spiritual, convinced that the memory points to a larger reality. Others grow more skeptical of ordinary explanations, unwilling to dismiss anomalies. All are changed. Researchers who interview these witnesses often note the same detail, the sincerity in their eyes. They may not agree on what was seen, but they agree on the weight of the memory. It is not casual, it is not frivolous, it is carried with solemnity, like a sacred relic kept close to the heart. In this way, memory becomes more than personal, it becomes cultural. The farmer's silence, the pilot's trembling voice, the artist's spiral, the seeker's journal, together, they form a chorus of human response, a collection of impressions that, even without translation, shape how we understand mystery. Perhaps this is the design. Perhaps communication from beyond does not arrive in broadcasts or manifestos. Perhaps it arrives in memories, small, private, enduring. Each witness becomes a keeper of a fragment, carrying it quietly until it filters into art, into culture, into collective awareness. The burden is not only theirs, it becomes ours. Think of it this way: every memory is a seed. One farmer plants it in silence, one painter plants it in canvas, one dreamer plants it in sleep. Over time, the seeds grow together, forming a forest of symbols and stories. We may not understand the forest fully, but we cannot deny its presence. Rest with this image. The burden of memory is not only heavy, it is fertile. It reshapes lives, grows into art, fills journals, guides seekers, transforms silence into culture. Even when forgotten by the world, it endures in the heart of those who carry it. The silence lingers. The memories endure, and through them, the dialogue continues. Memories once carried do not remain confined to a single life. They ripple outward, touching families, friends, even strangers who listen to the story. Over time, they become part of something larger: collective memory, folklore, culture. A father who saw lights in the forest tells his children, not in boast, but in caution. The children grow up with the memory as part of their family's heritage. They may not have seen the lights themselves, but they inherit the burden of knowing. The story becomes part of their identity, a quiet thread woven into their sense of the world. A grandmother sketches symbols she once saw on a fragment of strange material. She never translates them, but she leaves the sketches in a notebook. Decades later, her granddaughter discovers them and feels the same sense of awe. The memory transfers, reshaped but alive, passed like a secret inheritance. This is how personal encounters become cultural. The details shift, but the impression remains. The farmer's silence becomes a local legend. The pilot's trembling voice becomes a story told in bars near airfields. The seeker's vigil in the desert inspires others to look upward. The burden spreads, not diluted, but amplified. Consider the way folklore preserves these impressions. In one town, stories circulate of lights above the hills in the 1950s. No one living remembers clearly, but everyone knows the tale. It becomes part of the landscape, shaping how people look at the sky, even generations later. The original witnesses are gone, but the memory lives on in shared imagination. This is not unique to UFO encounters. Human culture has always carried memories across generations in this way. Myths of gods descending from the heavens, legends of beings who taught humanity agriculture, language, or law, stories of luminous figures appearing in times of crisis, whether literal or symbolic. They are memories passed forward, evolving into folklore but retaining their resonance. Modern witnesses, then, are not isolated. They stand in a long lineage of memory keepers, carrying impressions that may one day be retold as myth. Their burden is not only personal, it is ancestral, cultural, collective. Close your eyes and imagine a child listening to such a story. The parent speaks softly, recounting the night when lights hovered silently above the desert. The child listens, wide-eyed, unsure whether to believe, but certain that the story matters. Years later, that child retells it, perhaps to their own children, perhaps to strangers around a fire. The details blur, the impression remains. The memory lives on. This process transforms private burden into public legacy. A witness's silence may still leave ripples. Their refusal to speak may itself become legend. The man who never told, the woman who carried a secret. The absence becomes part of the folklore just as much as the presence. Silence, too, is remembered. Researchers who study these generational stories note their consistency. Families often carry accounts across decades, with details surprisingly intact. A grandmother's sketch matches symbols drawn independently by her grandson. A grandfather's description of a humming sound is echoed by a granddaughter's recurring dream. The memories may not be literal transmissions, they may be archetypal impressions that echo across bloodlines, like dreams inherited without words. This continuity mirrors how culture itself preserves symbols: the spiral in Neolithic stone, the cross carved into cathedrals, the mandala drawn in sand. These are not individual inventions, they are collective memories carried forward as heritage. Each generation redraws them, ensuring they remain alive. And so, perhaps, with UFO encounters, the symbols seen on debris, the tones felt in encounters, the silences left by the men in black, all may ripple outward, carried by memory into folklore, into art, into culture. They become not only what one person saw, but what many remember. This is how communication may already be happening. Not as a clear transmission, but as impressions seeded into memory, spread across generations, shaping how we imagine the cosmos. It is possible, of course, that the memories are flawed, that stories change in the telling, that imagination fills the gaps, but this does not diminish their weight. Myths are not about accuracy, they are about resonance. A story retold for centuries carries meaning beyond fact. Its endurance is its message. Rest with this thought: the burden of memory may not be meant for the individual alone. It may be designed to ripple outward, to plant seeds in culture, to ensure the symbols and silences are never lost. In this way, every witness becomes part of something larger. Their memory is not only theirs, it belongs to us all. The silence lingers, the memories endure, and through them, the dialogue continues across generations. When we step back from the stories of lights in the sky, of tones in the air, of symbols on debris, of silence at the door, what remains constant is the witness, the individual who saw, who heard, who felt, and what they carry forward is not always proof, not always evidence, but memory. Memory becomes the final archive, not written in books, not stored in vaults, but alive within the hearts and minds of those who experienced. Unlike photographs, which fade, unlike recordings, which can be erased, memory endures. It is repeated, revisited, reshaped in the telling, but always alive. Each time a witness recalls the moment, the impression sharpens. Each time it is retold, it finds a new home. In this way, memory is both fragile and indestructible. fragile because it cannot be tested, indestructible because it cannot be taken away. Think of the rancher in Roswell who picked up fragments and saw symbols he could never forget. The debris was taken, the explanations given, but the memory remained. Think of the pilot who chased lights and logged them only as unidentified, yet carried the trembling memory for decades. Think of the child who stood in a desert backyard and watched a vast V of lights slide overhead. He grew old, but the memory did not. Memories are not always precise, but they are always real to those who hold them. They shape lives, quietly, like currents beneath the surface of a river. They steer choices, beliefs, and dreams. This is why memory itself may be the medium of communication. Symbols carved in stone can erode, tones can fade. Witnesses may fall silent, but memory carried forward ensures that the impression endures. Each person who remembers becomes part of a living archive, a library of impressions that cannot be erased. Close your eyes and imagine this archive. Not shelves of books, but millions of hearts, each carrying a fragment. One remembers a hum that vibrated through the air. Another recalls a triangle of lights blotting out stars. Another holds the image of glyphs glowing on a panel. Each fragment alone may seem incomplete. Together they form a chorus. Perhaps this is how communication is meant to unfold. Not in single transmissions, but in countless impressions scattered across humanity, preserved in memory. A distributed archive, living and breathing, immune to suppression because it is carried within us. The men in black may take photographs, authorities may dismiss reports, files may vanish into archives, but the memory remains. It cannot be confiscated, it cannot be erased. It may be silenced, but it still lives within, passed quietly through families, whispered across generations, retold as folklore. This is why memory is both burden and gift. It is heavy because it isolates. It is precious because it preserves. Witnesses may feel alone, but in truth, they are part of a vast, unseen network. Countless others carrying impressions of the same silence, the same symbols, the same tones. One researcher once said, "Every witness is an archive." It is true. Each person who remembers holds a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of the larger communication. The archive may never be complete, but it is alive, and in its living form it continues to speak. Think of dreams again. A dream may never be written down, but its impression can shape a life. So too with memory. The details may blur, but the resonance remains, and in that resonance lies meaning. It may even be that this is the intention, that communication from beyond is not about clarity, but about endurance. Words can be misheard, transmissions can be lost, but memories endure in the most personal way possible. They become part of the witness, inseparable from who they are. In this sense, the message becomes embodied, the human becomes the medium. Rest in this thought, that perhaps the purpose of symbols in the sky, tones in the air, silences at the door is not to deliver information, but to create memory. Memory that carries forward, spreads, transforms into art, into story, into culture. Memory that outlives the moment and becomes part of the collective. And so as this chapter closes, we return to the witnesses, to those who carried their memories quietly, who held them like secrets, who shared them only in whispers. Their burden is also their gift. Because through them the impressions live on, the silence lingers, the memories endure. And perhaps memory itself is the final language, a living archive, carried in human hearts, whispering across generations, reminding us that we have already been spoken to. The journey has carried us far, through caves and stones, through tones and harmonies, through sky symbols and sacred alphabets, through artists and dreamers, through silences enforced by pale visitors, through memories carried across lifetimes. Now, as we draw the story to its close, let us pause, not to summarize with facts, but to linger with impressions, because impressions, as we have seen, are the true medium of communication. Symbols carved on rock do not explain, they endure. Tones heard in the air do not instruct, they resonate. Lights in the sky do not translate, they impress. The men in black do not clarify, they silence, and memory itself does not resolve, it carries. In each case, the message is not in the detail, but in the presence, not in the definition, but in the impression. The cosmos may not be speaking to us in paragraphs, but in whispers that move beneath words. Think of the night sky once more. Stars scattered above you forming patterns that your ancestors named and your descendants will still recognize. The constellations are not sentences, they are shapes, yet they carry meaning across millennia. A hunter, a serpent, a cross. We do not ask the stars to explain. We let them remind us that we are part of something larger. The same is true of the symbols glimpsed in encounters, circles, spirals, glyphs, on debris. They are not alphabets we can translate. They are impressions meant to endure, to awaken, to be remembered. Think of sound again, the hum beneath a craft, the tone felt in the bones, the harmony that seems to press through silence. These are not songs we can record, but resonances we cannot forget. They remind us that the universe is not mute. It hums, it vibrates, it sings. Think of art, painters guided by visions, poets scribbling lines they feel were dictated, musicians composing melodies they swear they only remembered. Creativity becomes the receiver, the antenna. Through it, the impressions take form, flowing into culture, ensuring they do not fade. Think of silence, the hush that follows a sighting, the quiet imposed by pale-faced visitors, the absence that grows louder than any threat. Silence itself becomes a language, shaping how stories are told, how memories are carried, how the mystery endures. And finally, think of memory, the witness who carries the vision of lights for decades, the dreamer who sees the same spiral night after night, the seeker who returns to the desert, waiting for the pattern to return. Memory is not evidence, it is not proof, but it is alive. It carries the impression forward. It ensures the communication endures even when everything else is lost. Together, these are the forms of the message: symbols, tones, art, silence, memory. They weave into a single fabric, a communication not of words but of presence, a reminder that we are not alone, that the universe is larger than we can say, that meaning moves in ways deeper than speech. Close your eyes now and let the impressions drift through you. The spiral carved in stone, the hum beneath your chest, the triangle of lights blotting out stars, the glyph etched into a beam, the silence after the knock at the door, the memory that lingers like a dream. You do not need to explain them. You do not need to translate. You only need to let them be. They are messages not in definition, but in resonance, and resonance is enough. Breathe slowly, feel the rhythm of your own body, the harmony of breath and heartbeat. This too is communication. This too is symbol. You are part of the same symphony, the same language of presence. As you drift towards sleep, imagine the universe as a great composition, stars as notes, planets as chords, silence as rests. Together they form a music too vast to hear at once, but always present, always playing. We are within it, part of its harmony, part of its resonance. The mysteries we have traced tonight, the symbols, the tones, the silences, the memories, are not intrusions. They are invitations. Invitations to listen, to wonder, to remember. Invitations to let the cosmos speak not in words, but in impressions that settle quietly into the soul. And so, as this story closes, let the impressions carry you gently into rest. The symbols are still here, the tones still hum, the silence still lingers, the memory still endures. You are not outside of this communication. You are part of it. You are part of the pattern. You are part of the resonance. You are part of the silence. You are part of the memory. The night deepens, the stars shine quietly, the universe hums with its silent symphony. Let the symbols drift into your dreams, let the tones carry you downward, let the silence cradle you softly, let the memory rest within you like a seed. Sleep now. The message has already been given, the dialogue has already begun, and in the quiet of your dreams the cosmos will continue to speak. The silence lingers, the sky is not empty, the story is never over. Good night.